"What is man?" he inquired, reclining in his time-worn, voluminous armchair with a throaty chortle. The shadows clung to his eyes, and his hair seemed to have long abandoned any semblance of grooming, in stark contrast to the impossibly vast house that encased us, its innards crammed to bursting with the trappings of opulence. "You may be directing that inquiry towards an unsuitable individual, my friend. I am somewhat inexperienced to be addressing such profound contemplations," I replied, a hint of a smile playing on my lips, as he laughed and emitted a raspy cough in response. 340 trips around the sun, and still wisdom eludes me. I fancy myself acquainted with a great many things, but this vexing question nags at my very core. What is man? I cast my gaze over the countless tomes, the vivid paintings, the intricate carpets, and the relics of bygone eras that adorned the chamber. Memories, wouldn't you say? We are but a sum of experiences, a collection of recollections. That's what the pioneers of this venture failed to grasp. How many have submitted themselves to the process? 15, including you, if memory serves. He hunched forward, dropping an indiscernible something into his glass of water. The liquid swirled as he stirred it with a gilded spoon, then struck the rim with a delicate clink. Indeed, there were 15. 4 of them I was intimately acquainted with. Mad they all became, every last one. They met their ends by their own hands, one with particularly brutal resolve. One hardly fathoms the toll it takes on the human spirit when granted the gift of youth anew. It's not the sensation of rebirth, it's a hollow emptiness. Words can hardly do it justice, but after that first procedure, it was as if I had been usurped. I felt as though I had perished, and another had assumed my role. Everything was pristine. My organs were wholly rejuvenated, my bones were sturdy, and my resolve was steadfast. Yet my spirit floundered, adrift. This vessel I inhabited was foreign, and I was all too aware. Piece by agonizing piece I was reconstructed, the surgeons excising and replacing all that once composed my being. There is no neural connection within me that remains from my birth. I am no machine, but the spectre of one haunts me still. These very droplets sustain my existence, he lamented. In a mere 2 weeks I shall undergo the procedure once more. Thus, one of the original trio persists. But who am I truly? Do I still qualify as a member of the human race? I find myself pondering the essence of humanity itself. His eyes, tinged with melancholy, peered into the liquid depths of the glass before he drained its contents in a single decisive swallow. I surveyed the myriad artifacts that bore minuscule engravings of barcodes. "Mortuae cogitationes," he uttered as my fingers traced the bars. "These encapsulate my most cherished memories, or at the very least those deemed most significant. They are referred to as the dead thoughts, or the eternally forsaken. Bereft of these objects, my recollections wither. My cognition has deteriorated to such an extent that unrestricted access eludes me. These artifacts, this technology, enable me to grasp my own identity. It's a disheartening reality, but the importance of these things is such that I feel as if a part of me has been pilfered." I retrieved a compact notepad from my jacket pocket and produced my time-worn pen. The notion that this pen represented more than mere utility was unsettling, but I didn't depend on it to preserve my memories. "What has been stolen from you? Can you identify it?" He chuckled before responding, "No, but I'm aware of its significance. My housekeeper has a photograph of the object. It's an antiquated snow globe. I believe it depicts the Brooklyn Bridge. That's a bridge in New York, though I imagine you're already acquainted with that fact. Forgive my impoliteness, but I no longer take memories for granted. I've been assured that the impending treatment will recalibrate my cognitive faculties, but the power of choice remains mine. I can still determine my own destiny, yet to do so, I must first comprehend who I am in the present. Can you retrieve this item for me? Will you manage it within a fortnight?" I jotted down the salient details, recording my observations and, in a manner of speaking, sketching my own mental portrait of this enigmatic individual. I will unravel the mystery of your identity. This I promise. Perhaps you'll achieve what countless physicians have sought in vain for centuries. I appreciate your efforts. Exhaustion weighs heavily upon me, so I shall retire. Finances pose no obstacle. Do whatever is necessary. The old man departed the chamber with considerable effort, and I returned my notepad to my pocket. A final sweeping gaze around the room left me pondering whether these objects were truly the sum of a person's existence. As I exited the grand estate, the cityscape loomed in the distance, stirring recollections of my own life and all that had transpired. I contemplated the experience of erasing everything, only to start anew. It would likely be an illusory dream, an exercise in selective wishful thinking. I retrieved the notepad from my jacket and perused the names I had jotted down: a distinguished physician, a psychologist, and numerous addresses linked to the old man's distant acquaintances. I was uncertain how much more I could learn about this individual that hadn't been documented eons ago. This aged soul seemed to barely inhabit this world any longer. His movements were labored, his memories fragmented, and even though these symptoms were not uncommon in the twilight of life, he existed far beyond his natural span. He was reduced to a mere experiment. It grieved me to think that this man had likely perished long ago. My current pursuit was merely that of a thief who had robbed a spectre. Thus I proceeded to my first appointment, a consultation with the chief physician, a descendant of the individual who had pioneered this extraordinary procedure. The surgical facility resembled a bastion of medical advancement. It seemed that everyone was aware of this enterprise promising immortality, provided one could afford the price and accept a life akin to that of the old man. I was ushered into an immaculate, welcoming office that appeared to be fashioned entirely of glass. Suspended amidst the brilliance of these medical virtuosos, I observed a labyrinth of pipes and tubes connecting machines and chambers. The complexity of it all was utterly bewildering. "Good afternoon. I trust you haven't been kept waiting unduly," the doctor stated, hurriedly draping his coat upon a time-worn rack in the corner. "This heirloom belonged to my great-grandfather. I suppose a touch of sentimentality afflicts us all, wouldn't you agree?" He settled into his seat with a smile, but I could discern his eagerness to expedite the matter, as if it held little significance to him. He desired to conclude this conversation as swiftly as possible. "I assume you're well acquainted with my client. The item in question is a figurine, a snow globe to be precise. He referred to it as, I believe, mortue cogitationes. We also call them morticias. They serve as the linchpin for our program. These figurines act as nodes, bridging the external world with the cerebral cortex. While we might typically refer to them as associations, they function more as memory anchors. The mechanics of their operation remain somewhat elusive, but thus far we've achieved our greatest successes with these external anchors. In a fortnight, we intend to experiment with connections we artificially attach to the brain itself for the first time. This should restore memories on a permanent basis and alleviate the burden on the patient's psyche." His words poured forth in a rapid torrent as I methodically recorded what I deemed crucial. Why would someone steal such an anchor? Do these items possess any intrinsic value? Could the procedure be replicated by dismantling the objects? I inquired, already detecting his nonchalance from the expression that crossed his features. "No, that's out of the question. The patents for the morticias are public domain. Given sufficient expertise, funds, and time, anyone could fabricate similar morticias, but the true value of the program lies in the nanomachines and the genetic treatments administered to patients. These processes can only be carried out within these walls. All the machinery you see before you is necessary for bestowing immortality upon a single individual. Yet even this immortality is dearly paid for in our present time. Moreover, the worth of morticia is purely personal, as the connections that once existed in the brain now persist solely as copies. If those copies are lost, destroyed, or the like, some of our patients might possess additional copies, though the quality of any such replication would likely be dubious. So, should the item be destroyed, the memory could potentially be lost forever? Yes. At least in this specific case, it's difficult to surmise otherwise. As you should be aware, this patient is our most venerable participant. His brain's physical condition is remarkable, but the passage of time has taken its toll on his mental state. We hope the treatment in a fortnight proves successful, allowing him to reclaim his memories from that point forward. However, if the object fails to resurface by then, it's probable that the memory would be irretrievably lost. I finished jotting down my thoughts and put the pad back in my pocket. Living eternally seems a heavy burden to bear. Thank you for your time, Doctor. The doctor sprang up from his chair, instinctively shrugging his coat back on. For the time being, I suppose it is, but soon we'll have made significant progress. For now, it remains a project accessible only to the elite few, but someday humanity will no longer be acquainted with death. Eventually, death itself will be nothing more than a morticia, a distant memory. Have a pleasant day. My assistant will escort you out. I hope you track down the perpetrator. My eyes wandered through the glass-encased corridors, and I felt as if I were inside a brain. All these tubes and hoses, the machines and scientists, their talents and accomplishments combined to create something singular, unlike anything I had ever witnessed before. In awe, I exited the building and slid into my car. I sparked up a cigarette and contemplated my own life, about all the chances I let slip away and all the people I'd lost. Life came at a steep price, yet I found solace in my mortality. The notion that one's life could devolve into an experiment and that everything I knew today could be stripped away was unsettling. More disconcerting still was the idea that it may have already happened to me, and I would be none the wiser. That was how little individual human lives mattered now. Perhaps they never held much value to begin with. My journey led me to the victim's psychologist next. I discovered a simple apartment, not an extravagant office. The neighborhood was unremarkable, and it baffled me how a doctor of her caliber attracted such a patient. A young woman greeted me, ushering me inside and offering me tea. "Is there anything else I can do for you? Or would you prefer to dive right in?" I retrieved my pad and scanned my notes. "All's well. Let's sit down for now," I replied, and the young woman seated herself opposite me on a charming floral-patterned sofa. She opened a slender file, revealing she had come well prepared for our meeting. "You'll need to sign here briefly. My patient has authorized me to share certain information with you, but this information must remain confidential." I was familiar with documents like this one, and signed without reading a single word. "Of course. Your patient is a wealthy and highly renowned man. How long have you been treating him?" She snapped the file shut and set it aside. "Roughly a decade now. Shortly after I earned my degree, someone sought me out. I was handpicked to care for this patient exclusively, and following a face-to-face meeting, I consented. Naturally, I'd heard of him. We'd studied his life, his condition, and the potential impact of this experiment on humanity in countless classes. What have you gleaned about my patient?" Her inquiry intrigued me, and I recognized her intent to gauge my knowledge. He was a prosperous businessman some 200 years ago, yet his crowning achievement was likely his autobiography, which has outsold every other book to date, an advantage of such longevity. Your patient is purportedly highly intelligent, although I didn't encounter him at his prime. What I do know is that he takes great pride in his life. Childless and without any living relatives, he struck me as profoundly lonely and reclusive, listless and uneasy. Yet I can scarcely fathom what it must be like to witness one's own mind embodied in objects scattered around a room, day in and day out. She offered a smile and a nod of approval. His life is certainly extraordinary. Even I only know him through his tales, books, and legends. Nobody, not even the man himself, can be certain of who he truly was or is. My expertise in cognitive neuroscience is limited. especially considering I lack access to the actual processes of this experiment. The doctors alone know what is being done to the patients. Once upon a time, immortality seemed potent to me, almost divine. Now I perceive it as a solitary agony. We were never meant to live eternally. All that comes into existence must also fade away. Genuine immortality is not within our grasp, or so I've come to realize through all of this. As I jotted down my thoughts, I mulled over her words. Do you believe your patient wishes to abandon the program? Could the disappearance of the item be linked to such a motive? She shook her head, proffering a plate of cookies. I doubt he'd ever opt out. He wasn't always alone. At around 40, he wed a woman who tragically perished in an accident. That same year, he joined the ranks of the world's wealthiest individuals. His fortune, foresight, and vision birthed this project. Among the participants, he alone has managed to retain a lucid mind. His determination appears superhuman to me. I accepted a cookie, expressing my gratitude. And what if his mind begins to deteriorate now too? How would anyone discern the onset of such a process? You said it yourself. We're not built for immortality. She cracked open another marginally thicker file, presenting me with some scans. You may not glean much from these, but these scans were taken roughly a month ago. They indicate that brain activity is on the rise, not waning. The treatment is taking effect. His brain is forging new synapses, supplanting the dead tissue accrued over the years and from prior treatments. Physically speaking, he's on the cusp of attaining unprecedented health. The next treatment is designed to address his mental state. By obviating the need for morticia, he'll become an ordinary individual, even regaining the ability to venture outside. I'd say his future appears quite promising. Glancing around, I spotted an array of photographs. She had journeyed the world over, yet even she struck me as having no one but this elderly man and his affliction. Appearances can be deceptive. It's disheartening how little value a life seems to hold when it stretches into infinity. Do you believe your patient simply weathered the loss of all those other participants, all those people he once cherished and esteemed? The psychologist's brow furrowed, her expression tinged with sorrow. My words may have been too candid, but I sought her insight. Nobody merely endures life. Even if we can entirely rejuvenate a person's body, scars linger. Even if we can process events and learn, our souls still bear the marks of trauma, inescapable wounds. Soul scars cut the deepest, tearing at our very essence. My patient's soul is marred by a staggering multitude of scars. What you witness today is little more than a spectre. Perhaps you'll manage to reassemble this puzzle, and maybe even the most profound scar will heal someday. But if you ask whether I believe it's feasible, I'd say I hope so, but I don't genuinely believe it will come to pass. If you track down the thief and retrieve the object, then inquire about this memory with my patient. Only then will you comprehend the depths of a person's suffering. I sensed she knew which memory the old man had lost, and I harbored my own suspicions. What mattered now was where this trail would lead me. For the time being, I tucked away my notepad and bid her farewell. One final destination awaited me, where I was confident I'd unearth the remaining answers. Night had fallen, casting the streets in darkness as I meandered through the park towards my objective, a modest cemetery on the city's outskirts. Only a handful of notable individuals had been laid to rest here, but one person especially piqued my interest. Locating her grave, I observed that it was among the few meticulously tended to. A vase of flowers adorned the elegant marble stone, and I scrutinized the name and dates inscribed thereon to ensure I hadn't stumbled upon the wrong resting place. This woman had been dead for such an interminable stretch of time that her grave ought to have vanished from existence. No one would care about someone whom nobody could remember. There was no one left who knew she had ever lived, except for that one extraordinary individual. My client had divulged little about his life or this assignment, but as I pried open the ancient grave, I unearthed a small wooden box that I was convinced held a trove of answers. I placed the box on the cold, grimy ground and caught my breath. The flickering light of my gas lantern was waning, and I doubted if I possessed the strength to seal the grave again. Exhausted, I sparked up a cigarette and settled down beside the chasm in the grass. Clutching the box, I gazed at the moon with a weary smile, questioning whether this knowledge was worth unearthing. Did I genuinely want to be ensnared in this morass? It didn't seem like I had much of a choice. I could replace the box and feign ignorance, claiming that I had exhausted every avenue, but ultimately failed. Someone else might assume my role, but that wouldn't be my concern. Why was it so challenging to elude this clandestine truth? I resealed the grave and gathered my belongings as my cigarette fizzled out. Settling into my car, I felt a deep ache in my bones and set the box on the passenger seat. I hadn't yet peeked inside, but I had taken it with me. I knew where this path would lead me and dreaded uncovering the truth. I inserted the key into the ignition and drove at a leisurely pace towards home. The streets were deserted. Not a soul stirred at this ungodly hour. I had spent my youth here, in the neighborhood where I resided. Everyone knew me. Some held me in esteem, but to the majority I was inconsequential. I was merely another face among the crowd, one they had seen and one they knew. In an odd sense, I understood the old man's plight. I knew the sensation of bearing a name that had been long forgotten, of being a spectral figure who carried out the necessary tasks. As the engine fell silent and I withdrew the key from the ignition, I exhaled a heavy sigh. It was a moment of decision, a moment that would irrevocably alter the course of my life. Cradling the box, I stepped into my apartment. My cat greeted me expectantly, and I tended to him before shedding my cumbersome attire. Bone-tired, I sank into the couch, nursing a chilled beer as my gaze remained locked on the box before me. It still inspired fear, but I no longer had the luxury of choice. This was my life now. Like the old man's psychologist, I had chosen my path, or perhaps it had chosen me. Maybe I alone possessed the capacity to accomplish what was necessary. The lock on the box was corroded with age, but it hindered my access. It seemed a final admonition, an entreaty to turn back. Undeterred, I grabbed a letter opener and pried the lock free. The task proved simpler than anticipated. Dust and grime dispersed across my table, and I cleared everything aside save for the box. Lifting the lid, a musty odor greeted me. I beheld old photographs, a partially ripped letter, and a slim file. The photos depicted a young woman in a dress, clutching a bouquet of flowers. She stood at a railing, a bridge looming in the background. The image appeared to have been captured during a tempest, as water lashed violently through the air. Remarkably preserved for its age, I surmised that these were images of my client's deceased fiancée. I had fully expected to uncover the missing item within this box, but it seemed the situation was not as simple as I had envisioned. The torn letter was indecipherable, its surface marred by red paint. Individual characters were vaguely discernible, but no coherent words emerged. The file, however, contained poems penned on aged stationery, likely addressed to the once-betrothed woman. A summer breeze. In cooling summer breeze her touch I find, as body's pulse begins to ebb and sway, and lo, the numbing ache in heart unwinds. What grace hath brought this solace to my mind, through shadows dark, through life's decaying day, in cooling summer breeze her touch I find. Upon my breast, a fragile wreath entwined, with whispered words she lays the pain away, and lo, the numbing ache in heart unwinds. In every thread I sense her fingers bind, a tapestry of love that stays decay, in cooling summer breeze her touch I find. What strength remains, in feeble steps confined, in sweet repose she bears me far away, and lo, the numbing ache in heart unwinds. Though body wanes and earthly ties unbind, in gentle arms I find my sanctuary, in cooling summer breeze her touch I find, and lo, the numbing ache in heart unwinds. The cryptic verse, which had defied my comprehension on the page, now seemed to crack open like a rotted coffin lid, exposing more than I'd ever hoped to uncover. The old man, it appeared, was not quite the spry and nimble character we'd been led to believe. It struck me that necessity, that cruel mistress, might have driven him to embark on this dark endeavour. The whispers and rumours that swirled around him remained elusive, as no living soul could claim true knowledge of the man. Countless videos, photographs, and interviews existed, but none could be deemed incontrovertible, particularly when dealing with the wealthiest and most influential individual on the planet. Reluctantly, I returned the items to their resting place, securing the box with a heavy heart. My hunger for answers had only grown, and I knew that the old man himself held the keys to the mysteries I sought. Yet I dared not speak of my discovery just yet. Though I had initially suspected the old man of guiding me down this twisted path, I now found myself entertaining the notion of a hidden puppet master whose identity remained shrouded in darkness. Day 2. Retreating to my modest balcony, I gazed upon a weathered photograph of my elder brother. His smile radiated a joy, an unadulterated bliss that I'd never tasted. As a global technician, he grasped the threads that held our world in its delicate balance, a master puppeteer's rope maker. The image of the enigmatic elder figure, his fingers dancing upon my unseen strings, refused to leave my thoughts. My acceptance of this assignment had been driven neither by his fame nor the promise of financial reward, but by an insatiable curiosity. It wasn't the life or the fears of this wealthy and renowned individual that intrigued me. Rather, I sought to uncover the insignificance of it all. My brother and I had known a childhood of relative affluence, yet the sweet embrace of happiness had always eluded me. This quest sprang not from malice or base desires, but from a longing for something purer, more profound. I found myself empathizing with the old man's sorrow and straining to fathom the burden of an eternal grief. It was this empathy that had led me to suspect him as the orchestrator of the whole affair. I had imagined him eager to erase the painful memories, now that the morticia's services were no longer required and the past would remain forever buried. The perfect crime, executed by a man who could not recall his own guilt. But reality, as I was learning, wore a different face. My fingers trembled as I dialed the number I had been provided, and I found myself with an appointment just an hour hence. I could sense the old man's anticipation, the unspoken assumption that my quest had borne fruit. Upon my arrival at the sprawling estate, a veritable army of workers scurried about, tending to the luxurious exotic flora. The stark contrast with the townspeople, who barely eked out an existence amidst a devastating drought, weighed heavily on my conscience. The heavens had not opened for months, and the miracles promised by modern science remained cruelly out of reach. This time, I was ushered into a different chamber, where I settled onto a plush sofa beside an imposing wall cabinet. Before me stood an ancient table, adorned with glasses and plates, the remnants of some prior gathering. The old man was wheeled into the room, a pale, frail figure racked by violent coughs. His hair, as insubstantial and wan as his skin, seemed to wilt upon his scalp, and his eyes struggled to remain open. As the nurse positioned his wheelchair beside the table, he waited for her departure before addressing me. "What have you found? Do you have it? Where is it?" he demanded, his excitement driving him to lurch forward as best he could. Nervously, I thumbed through my notepad, all too aware of its futility. Desperate to buy time, I chose my words carefully. "I'd like to ask you a few more questions about the crime," I murmured, stealing only a fleeting glance at the old man's increasingly restless gaze. "Is this what you're wasting my time for? For this? For God's sake, are you seriously kidding me? Do you actually know who I am? Do you know what this is all about? Crime scene? The course of events? Why don't you go to the police, get the file, or do I have to do it for you? Are you even capable of doing the simplest tasks on your own?" He railed, his anger erupting into a torrent of coughs, leaving him gasping for breath. Unruffled, I filled a glass with water and offered it to him. With shaking hands he snatched the glass, downing its contents in a single desperate swallow. "I need to hear it from you. Things have surfaced, you see. I've interrogated countless souls, but the truth remains a fickle, elusive thing. It's my task to weave the strands of reality, but first I must hear it from your lips. Share with me what you've witnessed, what you've heard. Only then can I assemble the puzzle. Only then will the image crystallize. The old man huffed, setting the empty glass upon the table with a sharp clink. I'll give you a clear picture, he spat, yanking a small wallet from the depths of his jacket. From within he extracted something, placing it deliberately on the table. This man was the last person I quarreled with before the artifact vanished. His words faltered, and a strange vacancy stole into his eyes. A smile stretched across his face, causing his features to twitch in an unsettling dance. Are you all right? Should I fetch someone? My concern met with a dismissive wave of his hand. Do you know why I chose you? He responded, his voice altered, as if possessed by another. His entire being seemed to have transformed in an instant. Do you know why I chose you? He responded, his voice altered, as if possessed by another. His entire being seemed to have transformed in an instant. You told me you saw something within me. You extended a generous offer, and I accepted. I haven't given it much thought beyond that, I replied, prompting his grin to widen. Lies. That's what intrigues me about you. Your thought process, your perspective on the world. It's a rarity, one that's growing scarcer by the day. Find the object. 13 days remain, he intoned, his voice unrecognizable from moments before, only to be interrupted by another fit of coughing. Now pour me more water, for heaven's sake. How many times must I request it? He barked, the earlier semblance of serenity vanishing as if chased from the room. It was as though a fleeting shadow had passed behind his eyes, an involuntary reflex he could no longer control. Forgive me, I shouldn't have squandered your time. Might I take this photograph? I inquired, gesturing to the small picture of a clergyman resting on the table. Yes, that man will reveal all. I've grown weary of conversation. I require respite. With the faintest chime of a bell, the old man was swiftly wheeled from the room. I lingered on the sofa, studying the photograph. A staff member materialized at my side. May I show you out? They offered, the unspoken message clear. My presence was no longer desired. Do you know this man? Can you tell me where to find him? I inquired, given the old man's failure to provide any details. Certainly. He used to frequent this place. His last visit, however, coincided with the theft. My employer considered him the prime suspect, but the police found no evidence. You can locate him either at the secluded chapel atop the mountain, beyond the northern village, or in the impoverished quarter where he resides. My employer wields considerable influence, the servant divulged, and I grasped the unspoken implications. Justice, it seemed, was a matter of perspective, particularly in circles like these. I trailed the servant outside, scrutinizing the photo more intently. Time had worn it thin, and the remnants of a mortician's etching marred the back. This artifact, too, harbored a memory the old man no longer required. It struck me as odd how little was known about a man of his stature, but of course he had means to maintain his privacy. After all, he had endured for over 3 centuries, 4 lifetimes' worth, and emerged from each treatment as vigorous as he had been at 20. It was difficult to envision him in his youth. I had glimpsed aged television interviews, but a century had passed since his last public appearance. He sequestered himself within one of his many estates, scattered across the globe. No one knew his whereabouts, and none dared to inquire. I had dared to ask questions, but I had also been foolish enough to accept this assignment. What did I truly know about reason? The day was still young, so I opted to seek out the pastor personally. The old man had divulged little, but my suspicions about his deeper knowledge of the theft had only grown. Though unconfirmed, the evidence hinted that the old man himself had spirited the object away, perhaps with the aid of his dual personality. I resolved to question the psychologist later, especially since she had failed to mention this condition. I was familiar with the small chapel the servant had described, but had never ventured there. Too often, we bypass places or sites, constrained by time or shackled by self-interest. Today, I raced through the streets, making haste to where I believed the pastor to be, only to discover an empty chapel. Upon the altar rested an aged, slightly fractured walking stick. I scanned the surroundings and called for the pastor just beyond the building, but none materialized. The servant's rough description of the pastor's residence would not suffice, so I ambled through the adjacent graveyard, hoping the pastor might appear. Alas, no one but I visited the solemn site. I settled on a bench beneath a massive ancient oak and perused my notes. None of the individuals I had encountered and interviewed thus far fit the perpetrator's profile, yet they all concealed the truths they knew. The old man was neither as hale and ageless as the doctor claimed, nor as adrift as his psychologist implied. Undeniably, he was toying with me, though I had yet to discern any gain from this manipulation. As I slipped my notepad back into my jacket, an elderly woman took a seat beside me on the bench, her smile warm and gentle. How lovely to see someone paying their respects. So many I've known have passed on, and their kin pay no mind to their memory. This place is one of remembrance, but also one of anguish. What brings you here? I haven't seen you around town before. I apologize if my conversation is intrusive, but I rarely encounter others in this place, and I visit twice weekly. Her politeness was palpable, and her gestures betrayed no connection to the case at hand. Instead, she was a fortuitous encounter, an unexpected interlude in my investigation. I actually hoped to have a word with the pastor. It seems he's acquainted with someone I know, and I thought he might help me with a little problem. But alas, he's nowhere to be found, and I haven't the faintest idea where he lives, except that he resides in the poorer part of town. The old woman's gaze dipped, and her smile took on a somber quality. Sadly, the pastor has lost everything. In spite of the hardships life has dealt him, he remains a deeply devout man. In his youth, he lost his little girl. She drowned one winter after falling into the lake. He saw it happen from a distance. Ever since, those images have haunted him. That tragic event changed the way he approached life. He and his wife devoted themselves wholeheartedly to this chapel and their community work. However, a couple of years ago, his wife fell gravely ill. The pastor poured all their savings into her treatment, even though there was no hope of a cure. I don't believe in God, but I sense a certain power in this place. I think it amplifies my memories, letting me see those I've lost. I believe I can speak to them, even if they can't hear me, even if they're gone. Here, they're real to me. That's the power of memory. That's the power of hope. When the pastor lost his wife, his world crumbled. I heard rumors of alcohol and gambling addictions, but I can't say for certain. He no longer has his house. It's not far from here. If you'd like, I can give you the address. The bank repossessed it, but sometimes he still sits outside, staring at the place. I've seen it happen quite a bit lately. I'm afraid I don't know his new address, though. The woman divulged much and meandered often. It took me a few moments to steer her back on track and jot down the address. Thank you kindly. You've been a great help. I hope that you'll soon find someone to share in life with, not just in death, I told her, and she offered a smile. When you're as old as I am, death lingers closer than you'd prefer. I know that soon I'll be lying here too. I no longer fear it. I've lived my life. Now all I have are memories, and one day even those will fade away. What remains then? She posed, and I grasped the torment that must plague the old man with his eternal recollections. Perhaps that was why he made them vanish. Maybe one memory was too unbearable, too burdensome. I think you're right. We aren't built for eternity. Death is an integral part of life. Without it, we lose all meaning. Without it, we lose our sanity. The woman expressed her gratitude for our conversation, and I cast a final glance at her as I departed the grounds. The streets guided me up a modest incline, and I beheld an array of splendid houses with meticulously tended gardens. Folks gathered, sipping beer or enjoying a barbecue, and I offered greetings, even though we were strangers. At the terminus of this lengthy road, I discovered a grand house bearing the insignia of the local bank, a foreclosure in progress. A man slumped next to the sign, an empty beer bottle in his grasp, scarcely conscious despite the early hour. There was no outward indication that the man was a pastor, but the elderly woman's description left little doubt that he was the one I sought. I crouched down, the reek of alcohol on his breath unmistakable. "How are you?" I inquired, to which he replied with a guttural grunt. "I've been searching for you. We share a mutual acquaintance, an ancient acquaintance." He perked up, eyes opening. "Why did he send you? Haven't I suffered enough? Haven't I done everything he asked? What more does he want?" I observed that it wasn't fear of the old man he harbored, but a bottomless hatred. Whatever had transpired between them must have been far worse than I'd imagined. "Did he offer you the same thing he promised me?" I pressed, feigning knowledge of their arrangement. "He didn't promise me a thing. He swore to me. He told me I'd see them both again, my daughter and my wife. I believed him back then because I had no choice. It was the only hope I had left in this world. A man like him, who's immortal, seems like an authority on life. I asked him again after my wife passed, but he had aged. He was frail and devoid of hope. I know he'll be young again soon, but that second face I witnessed was enough to open my eyes." The man snorted, and I removed the empty bottle from his grip, propping him upright. "Why are you here now? Why did he do this to you? What did you have to do for him?" I persisted, and he drew in a sharp breath. "I found him volunteers, people whose faith was strong enough that they believed in the promise of eternal life. He assured me he treated them with respect, but I know it's not true. I know what I've done all these years. I've sold people. I've sold my own faith. I'm here because I threatened to expose everything. I wanted my absolution." He just laughed. "When I went to the police, they didn't even acknowledge me. No one can see me anymore. No one can help me anymore." His confusion was palpable, a natural consequence of his current state. The old man's sway was potent enough to hold the local police in his thrall. No one would lend credence to the ravings of a man in such a condition, and the scale of the endeavor he spoke of suggested there must be others like the pastor. "What did he need these people for? Did he tell you what he planned to do with them?" I probed, but the man merely shook his head, mute. He held more knowledge than he let on, but his condition precluded any rational interrogation. Lacking knowledge of his present dwelling, I escorted him to his former residence. I settled him on a small bench outside the entrance, where he gradually regained his senses. "You're next. I warn you, don't trust him. All he utters are lies. My daughter, my wife, everything I've sacrificed for just one more glimpse. Eternal life isn't man-made. Eternal life isn't within man's power. The one you serve doesn't believe in the immortal soul. He fears death. I don't." He coughed and spat something onto the ground before him. This man was a harbinger dispatched by the old man, a symbol of what would befall anyone who dared defy him. Whether he intended for me to discover everything else, I couldn't say, but he must have anticipated the possibility. He didn't seem genuinely fearful of the unfolding events, and I puzzled over why he'd chosen me for this task. "Don't surrender. The blind hope that's driven you this far has also given you strength. I don't know what you've done for this man, but you're not alone. Flee this place. Leave the past behind and don't return. Your memories tether you here, but your actions needn't. If you linger, this place will dominate you eternally." He straightened, locking eyes with mine. I perceived his desperation, but also his remorse for the man he'd become. Perhaps he deserved this fate, but I wasn't the arbiter of his destiny. "Heed your own advice. Run while you still can. The day will come when you'll recognize it, that second sight. You'll comprehend," he uttered, ignorant of my awareness of his subject matter. Even if he held some truth, I felt too weak to leave this place now, despite the lack of ties binding me here. I yearned to discern the old man's intentions, and I recognized that seeking the Morticia was the first step on that path. I departed from the pastor's side, retracing my steps down the street toward my car. As I ambled along, my phone jangled, and my brother's name flashed across the screen. "What do you need?" I queried, answering the call with my usual directness. He chuckled in response. "Ever the straight shooter? Got some time? I'm at our usual haunt. My flight leaves in 3 hours, and we haven't crossed paths in a spell." "I'll be there," I replied tersely, hanging up. I could sense he wanted something from me. Our bond was too intimate for me not to know. The day dwindled, and I remained in the dark about the missing object. Every detail I uncovered seemed designed to intimidate me in case I faltered. Yet it wasn't fear that gripped me. It was a compulsion to unravel my own identity, to discover a purpose that would infuse my life with meaning. After a leisurely half-hour drive, I arrived at the modest cafe on the town's periphery. I hadn't rushed nor strived for punctuality, but I'd made it nonetheless. Spotting my brother at our customary table, I saw his grin widen as he caught sight of me. He waved, his demeanor light, while the enigma that consumed me still held me in its grasp. Nothing seemed to matter in this world except the unseen puppet masters pulling our strings. "There you are. Thought we'd miss each other. Sit down. I'll order your usual," he said with an air of haste. As I sank into the chair, I mustered a feeble smile, though the weight of my thoughts made it a struggle. Inside, a seething resentment festered against the circumstances that had entangled us. I longed for a glimpse of the brother I once knew, the one that existed before the world ensnared us in its plots. It was almost laughable to consider how much we had transformed, and yet, in many ways, we hadn't changed at all. Fate had assigned us our roles, with my brother eagerly embracing his, while I continued to grope blindly, seeking my true calling. It wasn't a question of ambition or competence. Rather, each hurdle hurled my way eroded my core, rendering me a hollow shell of the person I once was. "I'm short on time, but I reckon we ought to catch up. I'll likely be in Japan for the next 4 years. I meant to write, but you know how it goes. So, what are you up to? Still laboring at the factory?" He sipped his pricey coffee and offered a smile, but I could tell it wasn't affection that motivated this visit. Rather, it was his self-loathing that drove him to see me. In his eyes, I was a failure, and he was determined to remind me of that. He knew full well I'd left the factory, yet he goaded me into admitting it. "No, I've got my PI license now. You know that was my endgame. I never cared for factory work. I want to make a difference in the world." He laughed, setting his cup down with a clatter. "And what sort of grand change do you envision? Do you really think tailing cheating spouses will shake the world's foundations?" His perception of me had always been the unassailable truth he clung to. My words held no weight with him, for he saw me as a man devoid of original thoughts. To him, I was incapable of forming my own opinions or ideas. It wasn't malice that festered within him. He wasn't cruel or callous. He was simply ensnared by the world's trappings, though he remained blissfully unaware of this fact. In his eyes, I was a disease that needed a cure, and he believed he could cure me, failing to recognize that a disease can't persist once it's been treated. In his view, it was perfectly acceptable to tear me apart, provided he could reconstruct me afterward. He fancied himself a creator, a maestro capable of tackling any challenge thrown his way, a man sought after by the world at large. Actually, I don't operate like that. I've got just one client. His expression shifted quickly, and the absence of his feigned smile was a welcome change. That client of yours must be loaded if a single job's enough to keep you afloat. Or are you strapped for cash? Need me to float you alone? He relished twisting situations, positioning himself as the generous benefactor. I recalled with warmth my big brother assisting with my homework and standing by me when schoolyard bullies would pounce. That brother was genuine. Everything he did sprang from love for me. But now, it was as if I beheld a spectral apparition, a man wearing the mask of my brother's old visage. The sight sent shivers down my spine, summoning a dread I hadn't tasted in years. It also made me question the veracity of my memories. Had I idealized my brother in my mind? Was my remembrance simply a fabrication of a past I had longed for? Perhaps it wasn't he who wore the mask, but me who had donned a facade, believing in a brother who never truly existed. The thought haunted me, refusing to be shaken off. I'm doing all right. Hard to believe, but I stumbled upon a golden opportunity and seized it, I said. And this time, his smile seemed genuine. I'm truly happy for you. I hope it stays this way, that all your dreams come true at last. A torrent of memories engulfed me as he placed an old pocket watch on the table. My gaze locked onto it, and a swell of recognition washed over me. It was our grandfather's treasured timepiece, the very one he had bequeathed to my brother. As a child I had coveted that watch, sneaking away with it to play and pretend our grandpa still lived. The sight of it stirred a curious cocktail of emotions within me. Part of me was elated to see it again, while another part mourned what was lost. It was as if my grandpa's spirit had returned for a fleeting visit. I want you to have this. Truth be told, it should have been yours all along. But I want you to know that I believe in you. I admire your pursuit of your passions. I'm sorry if I've ever seemed dismissive. The fact is, I've often lost faith in you. I doubted your abilities because I surrendered my dreams so readily. He nudged the watch my way, and I accepted it. Lighter than I remembered, it appeared ageless. My brother had preserved and cared for it all these years. I always thought you were content with your life. You yearned to see the world, I said, and he nodded, but his gaze dropped to the table. I did, he admitted, his voice laced with regret. But the world isn't as we pictured it in our youth. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. A darkness slithers beneath the veneer, and hate is ever close at hand. Time perpetually slips away, and there's so much to accomplish. He paused, meeting my gaze. But I want you to know I believe in you. In 4 years, you'll have achieved more than I ever could have fathomed. I'm grateful we have each other's back. United, we can surmount anything. It dawned on me today just how wrong I'd been about my brother. For years I'd kept my distance, striving for independence. I'd shied away from confronting my past. Sure, those memories weren't entirely false, but they'd painted a distorted picture of the present. Thanks. I bet by the next time we meet you'll be ready to chase your dreams too. We'll have so much to catch up on. I know we will, I said, and he flashed that familiar smile at me, but somehow it seemed different. He tossed the money for our drinks on the table and stood. I extended my hand and he pulled me into an embrace. See you in 4 years, little brother. As he exited the cafe, the realization struck me. All this time, he'd cared about me and wanted me to succeed. Only now did I grasp how much he meant to me as well. As day faded to dusk, I parked farther from my apartment than usual. I needed time to process the day's events. The encounter with my brother had left me with much to ponder. My eyes had been opened to a new world, one vastly different from the one I'd known, a world teeming with intricacies and complexities, and I understood my perspective had been skewed. There remained so much to discover, truths lurking just beneath the surface. I needed to see the world anew, unfettered by the biases of yesteryear. I scanned my notes as I ambled through the streets, the chilly wind my only companion. Nothing I read struck me as extraordinary, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd overlooked something. Perhaps a minor detail, but something significant nonetheless. Reaching my apartment, I fished my keys out of my pocket, inadvertently dropping the small photo of the pastor. What caught my eye was the faded barcode on the back. Surely it was no longer readable, and no one could decipher it for me, but it piqued my curiosity about the origin of these Morticia. I scooped up the photo and hurried inside. Tossing my keys on the table, I snatched up the old wooden box. As I'd suspected, I found the same barcodes on the ancient photos inside. Though even more worn, I was certain they were identical codes. Grinning, I sank into my couch, my brother's words echoing in my mind. In 4 years, when we reunited, much would have changed, and I was determined to make him proud. This was my destiny, my mission, and I knew it transcended a mere stolen artifact. I was on the cusp of something far greater, something that would alter everything. Perhaps it would be me who cracked the case, and in doing so, changed the world. Nursing the thudding in my skull, I lurched toward the television and flicked it on. News reports oozed misery, crashes, assaults, tempests, starvation. The world teetered on the edge of annihilation. Each day served as a grim reminder of mankind's penchant for brutality and the seemingly insurmountable tribulations afflicting our existence. The relentless hail of distractions only deepened the sense of despair. It was apparent that no one held the key to life's vexing questions, and I was no exception. Yet, somewhere within me, something stirred, a yearning to unearth the truth and tackle problems that appeared insuperable. Perhaps that was all it took, a readiness to take action, to make a difference, however minuscule it may be. Bored, I snapped off the TV and glanced at the ancient wooden box. Whoever had buried it for me knew the truth about the old man and understood that these items could guide me down the proper path. All I needed was to pose the right questions. It was unlikely that either the doctor or the psychologist would be open to conversation. Everything they divulged was inconsequential, and nothing that lurked between the lines revealed the truth. As I plunged deeper into my online research, I stumbled across a peculiar revelation. An IT company that had once dabbled in creating Morticia during its infancy. The project had been abandoned, and the company had since changed ownership. Yet something about it piqued my curiosity. To my astonishment, I discovered that the company persisted, an emblem of its enduring success. I wondered if any records from the project's early days remained. With a hopeful heart, I dispatched an email to the company, bracing for a protracted wait. Astoundingly, a reply materialized within minutes. I couldn't help but wonder, was this a lucky break or something more sinister at work? The response was terse. "Port, Dock 14, 8 o'clock. Dock 14 rang a bell, an antiquated hotel where sailors once sought sanctuary. A relic from a time long gone, I had no idea it was still in business. It didn't spook me, but I sensed I'd stumbled upon the trail I was destined to follow. I clutched my grandfather's watch tightly, mulling over the man he was and the questions I harbored about him. Maybe he was just a mortal like the rest of us, plagued by fears and doubts he'd concealed from the world. Perhaps the heroes we idolized were mere figments of our collective imagination, shadowy echoes of the gods we longed to emulate. The old man was one of these dreamers, consumed by the quest for immortality, even if it required sacrificing others to attain it. The pastor who abetted him was but a pawn in a grander scheme. I couldn't confront the old man with my suspicions, nor could I put into words what I knew for certain. It was a puzzle I had to piece together bit by bit, lest it shatter into oblivion. I retired to bed, fully aware that I needed to rise early to make my way to the hotel. Despite its uneventful beginning, the day had unearthed a wealth of secrets, long hidden from sight. Tomorrow would mark the first step in my quest to unravel the mystery that had consumed me. Day 3. As the morning sun cast its golden rays across my room, I sat in silence, deep in thought. Uncertainty plagued my mind. What did these recent events mean, and was I making a grave mistake? Taking this meeting may have been a misstep, but a primal instinct within me insisted that I held a secret that could change the world. I had never been one to share the world with others, but today felt different. It was as if I had unlocked a vision that few had witnessed before me, a glimpse into the past, present, and future all at once. It filled me with a sense of both power and powerlessness. The old man loomed over me, and I knew he was playing a game, but I couldn't tell if I was just a pawn in his scheme or the very reason for it. The fear of what lay ahead gripped me, but I was determined to see it through. Why me? The question echoed in my mind, but it was a query that would remain unanswered. I dressed quickly and made my way towards the harbour. The docklands were once bustling with activity, but now they were a shadow of their former selves, a haven for illegal trade and a refuge for those with nothing left to lose. The figures on the side of the road grew darker, and I was acutely aware of my surroundings. I parked my car in front of the old hotel, taking note of the time. It was a little past 8, but arriving late seemed like a safer option. I didn't want to draw too much attention to myself. I despised leaving my car in this area, but I had no other choice. The hotel looked deserted, and broken windows barely allowed a glimpse inside. To my surprise, the door was ajar, and an old man was coughing heavily at the reception desk. His fingers were gnarled and bony, and his skin sagged in loose folds. In his eyes I saw a profound weariness that extended beyond his physical being. It was as if he had already died. "Good morning. How can I help you?" he asked me in a slow and weak voice. Not knowing who had written to me, I had no choice but to pretend that they were already waiting for me. "I was told last night that I was expected at this place at 8 o'clock. The man looked at his watch and was visibly puzzled. "It is already 8:30, he said monotonously, and I merely laughed briefly. The walk was further than I thought it would be. "Sometimes life just gets in the way," I replied, and he sighed. "You are still young. Learn from your mistakes. Otherwise you'll be repeating them for the rest of your life. Sometimes time is important. Sometimes it isn't. Room 32 is upstairs on the 3rd floor. You can hardly miss it," he said, pushing a small card towards me. "Do I need a key?" I asked, puzzled. The old man just grinned and shook his head. "The key is upstairs. Excuse me, I have an important call to take," he said before disappearing into the other room. Moments later the phone rang, and he answered it, leaving me alone in the lobby. I examined the white card in my hand, baffled by its apparent lack of information. There was no writing or markings on it whatsoever. I pocketed the card and ascended the old, decrepit stairs. It was evident that no one had set foot in this hotel for years, but the eerie atmosphere didn't intimidate me. The dimly lit corridor stretched ahead of me, and I walked slowly until I reached room number 32, the only room whose number was still legible. I rapped on the door thrice, then turned to leave. Just as I was about to walk away, I heard a faint murmur from inside the room. My heart raced as I swiveled back, my ears straining to catch any sound. "Come in," bellowed a voice, and I swallowed hard as I pushed open the door. The room was dimly lit, but 2 figures sat huddled around a table near the window. They rose to their feet at the sight of me, and we exchanged greetings. "Good morning," said the first figure, who introduced himself as Mr. Portman. His hair was ashen, his beard long and silvery, and his eyes glinted with a piercing blue light. Seated beside him was a younger man, his hair dishevelled and his eyes bloodshot, but he smiled amiably. "This is Dr. Jameson," Mr. Portman interjected, nodding at his companion. "He's been assisting us with our research." "It's a pleasure to meet you," I said, attempting to sound congenial. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," said Dr. Jameson, his voice warm and welcoming. "Please have a seat." I entered the room, treading carefully to avoid the dusty corners. The air was stale, the carpet threadbare. A solitary lamp cast a pallid light across the walls, illuminating the bookshelves that lined the opposite wall. They were empty, save for a few scattered knickknacks. The furniture consisted of a massive wooden desk at the center of the room and a pair of chairs flanking it. Another door, leading to what I assumed was a bedroom, stood behind me. "So, tell me about yourself," said Mr. Portman, resting his hands on his knees. "Why are you interested in the old man?" "I'm afraid I can't answer that question without getting myself into trouble," I replied, my tone betraying my unease. "But you're welcome to ask me anything you like." "Very well," said Mr. Portman, his face taking on a serious expression. "What do you know about our company?" Next to nothing, I admitted, being forthright. I stumbled upon your company as part of my research. I understand you were involved in creating the first Morticia. Is that correct? Mr. Portman nodded gravely. That is true. Our company was tasked with creating the first Morticia, but we ultimately failed in our pursuit. Failed? Why? I inquired, my curiosity piqued. The project proved too expensive to be sustainable. We couldn't find a way to manufacture it in large quantities, which meant it would be impossible to sell at a reasonable price, he explained, shaking his head in dismay. Creating it was no small feat, and we spent more money than we had ever anticipated. What happened to the people involved in the project? I asked, sensing that there was more to the story. Many of them lost their lives in the attempt. Those who survived were either imprisoned, forced to live on the streets, or driven to suicide, he revealed, his gaze falling to the ground. We never disclosed the existence of the project to anyone, and we kept it a secret from everyone. The official version of events was that we failed to deliver and the old man took his business elsewhere. Very little is known about the project's past, but we have continued to conduct our own research over the years. Why have you decided to speak out now? I probed, eager to learn more. Because time has finally caught up with us, said Mr. Portman somberly. The old man is dying, and we are running out of options. From what I have heard, he is in fantastic shape. It is said that he will fully recover in less than 2 weeks. How do you come to say otherwise? I am afraid that isn't true, replied Mr. Portman sadly. He is dying, and his days are numbered. So, you are telling me that there is a limit to this process of immortality? There is no such thing as eternal life, young man, said Mr. Portman solemnly. The mortal body can only endure so much before it gives in, and then one day it will give in. But maybe that isn't true. Maybe the old man knows more than you. Why is it that you have asked me to come here? Because we need to understand how the Morticia works, said Mr. Portman simply. We know that it doesn't work as an elixir. It does not cure any illness or disease. As far as I understand it, it can reactivate forgotten memories. I am not sure how it works or how it is created, but I assume that you may know more than me. Do you have any files of the creation of the first Morticia? Or did the old man destroy them all? No, we don't have those records anymore, said Mr. Portman sadly. All we have left are some photographs and notes. What kind of photos? They are pictures of the old man's experiments with the Morticia. Dr. Jameson can tell you more. Dr. Jameson leaned forward in his chair, resting his elbows on his knees. He appeared nervous and uncomfortable, but he spoke clearly when he began to speak. The old man was obsessed with death. He wanted to learn everything he could about it. When he discovered that the Morticia worked by reactivating lost memories, he started experimenting with it in order to gain access to these memories. In the beginning, he was able to retrieve images from people who had been dead for centuries, but later he learned to use it on living subjects. What kind of memories did he get? The memories of the subject themselves, but also of their ancestors. He used the Morticia to see through their eyes, to experience what they had experienced, and to feel what they had felt. But what exactly was his goal? I have learned that he maybe tried to resurrect the dead. Could that even be possible with this technology? It depends on how advanced the technique is, said Dr. Jameson thoughtfully. I'm not sure if it would be possible to bring someone back to life after hundreds or thousands of years. But if enough memories existed, enough Morticias, then it could be possible. Yes, but it would require a lot of effort and resources, said Dr. Jameson. It is not something you can just do overnight. Perhaps this is precisely what the old man desires, I mused, breaking the silence. Perhaps it's not merely about his own mortality, but rather redirecting these memories elsewhere. Mr. Portman remained pensive. It's possible. He has never disclosed his true intentions. We only know what we've seen in his notes and experiments. This was all done over 200 years ago. It's unimaginable how far the technology has come since then, I remarked, a sense of awe creeping in. I believe his ultimate goal is to resurrect the dead, to bring them back to life. Dr. Jameson extended a fragile letter, almost crumbling in his hand. This is a letter penned by the old man to the chief scientist of his time. It's hardly legible now, but in it he warns of the grave risks posed by the Morticia, particularly to the mind and personality. We think he's found a way to manufacture the serum without subjecting his own psyche to it, but we have no proof. There are others like us, individuals who seek to expose the hazards of these experiments, but the old man is a formidable adversary. If you decide to assist us, you must tread carefully, for we're under constant surveillance. These next 2 weeks may be our only chance. Once the old man recovers, we'll be wiped out, as will you, should you choose to join us. I turned to face Mr. Portman and Dr. Jameson, their eyes intently fixed on me. A pause followed as I weighed their words, considering the weight of their mission. At last I spoke with a measured tone. I regret that I cannot offer you aid in this endeavor. I need to find the truth about the old man and uncover it for myself. That is why I am here. But I must do it alone. Thank you for your willingness to meet with me and share what knowledge you have. I rose from my seat ready to depart, but Mr. Portman caught my arm in a firm grip, his voice shaking with emotion. You do not understand, he said, his eyes burning into mine. We do not seek to benefit ourselves, but those who have passed on. As I looked back at him, my eyes were drawn to an old picture hanging on the wall. It was the same portrait of the old man's wife that I had found earlier. Without raising any suspicions, I asked for some time to think and requested that they wait outside. After a moment of hesitation, they agreed and left the room. As soon as I was alone, I turned back to the portrait and examined it closely. The woman in the painting had dark hair, and her face was etched with age, yet she was still strikingly beautiful. I couldn't shake off the feeling that there was something more to this picture. As I ran my fingers over the wooden frame, I noticed a strange bulge behind the canvas. It was an old metal safe, secured with a 4-digit combination lock. Without a second thought, I entered the year of the woman's death, and the lock clicked open. Inside was a single shiny key, the same type used for safe deposit boxes at the bank. I pocketed the key and carefully replaced the portrait. The two men were right to assume that the old man was watching our every move. It was uncanny how he knew we would meet in this place. I couldn't help but wonder if these men were working for or against the old man. As I stepped out of the hotel, the two men were waiting for me in the parking lot. Mr. Portman's gaze was fixed on me as I approached them. "Have you made a decision?" he asked. I nodded solemnly. "I cannot help you yet. I have my own path to follow. I must find out what the truth is behind all of this." Mr. Portman's face fell with disappointment, but he accepted my decision. "We will never give up," he said with conviction. "I know," I replied, "but for now we must part ways." Dr. Jameson's eyes betrayed his sadness as I turned to leave. He seemed to plead with me to reconsider, but I knew I had to follow my own instincts. "I will contact you when the time is right," I said firmly, before walking away without looking back. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of the two men in my rearview mirror. I wondered if I had made the right choice, but I knew that I needed to find my own way. The key I had found was engraved with the name of an old bank in the city center, and I knew that was where I needed to go next. As I navigated the labyrinthine streets of the metropolis, I finally arrived at my destination. The bank. It stood before me, a venerable edifice of stone, adorned with grand windows that allowed the daylight to penetrate its inner sanctum. Evidently this structure had been erected during the turn of the century, hence its unadorned, austere design. It was likely among the first of its kind, utilizing reinforced concrete instead of the more traditional building materials of brick or wood. Though outwardly unassuming, I could detect no signs of security fortifications, save for a small wooden sign with gilded letters, proclaiming the building's purpose as a bank. The door yielded effortlessly to my touch, granting me entry into the hallowed hall. Not a soul stirred within the spacious lobby, save for the staccato tap of my own footsteps, reverberating off the marble floor. I continued forth, traversing the dimly lit corridor, until I arrived at a threshold, adorned with a diminutive glass pane. It was there that I glimpsed a comely lass, her raven tresses cascading down her back, seated demurely behind the desk. As our eyes met, a smile unfurled across her visage, welcoming me with open arms. "Hello, sir," she said politely. "How can I help you?" "I am here to open a safe deposit box," I said simply. "By all means, follow me," she said cordially, leading me down a corridor to a chamber where an elderly gentleman awaited our arrival. Clad in a sombre grey suit, his shock of white hair was clipped close to his scalp, while his countenance bore the creases of age. As he rose to greet me, I could not help but notice the tremble in his outstretched hand, a sign of his advanced years. "My name is Mr. Grider," he said slowly. "You must be here for box number 8. "That's right," I answered, and took his hand. "Please follow me," he said, and led me into a small room where we were alone. He closed the door behind us and offered me a seat on the couch. He sat down opposite me and stared at me for a moment before speaking again. "I presume you're familiar with the old man?" he began, his voice thick with a note of caution. "But let me warn you, my friend, don't get involved with him. He saved my life, you see. Were it not for him, I wouldn't be standing here today." I nodded attentively, eager to hear more. "I was lying in a hospital bed, the victim of a hit and run by a drunk driver," Mr. Grider recounted. "He found me there and promised to restore me to full health. At first I was skeptical of his claims, thinking him nothing more than a charlatan looking to swindle me out of my last pennies. But then he showed me his powers." "What did he show you?" I inquired, my curiosity piqued. "He brought me back to life," said Mr. Grider matter-of-factly. "He imbued me with a new lease on life. But then he began to change me. He transformed my very being, until I was no longer the man I once was. Memories of my past faded into obscurity, and my personality was altered beyond recognition. I woke up the next morning feeling like a stranger in my own skin. He'd stolen everything from me, even my very identity." "And what became of you after that?" I asked, my voice hushed. I made inquiries, of course, hoping to learn more about the man who'd changed my life so dramatically. But nobody spoke of him. They were all too afraid of his power. I've spent the better part of my life searching for him, to no avail. I'm grateful to be alive, mind you, but I often find myself wondering about my past. Who was I before? What sort of life did I lead? Did I even exist, or was I a mere figment of imagination? He told me that one day a stranger would come to unlock this safe deposit box. I've waited over 5 decades for this day to arrive. Now, it's your turn. Perhaps you'll indulge me with a glimpse inside that box. I've always been curious about its contents. When you're ready to share, meet me at the cafe across the way." And with that, Mr. Grider rose from his seat and exited the room without looking back. I sat there alone for a spell, gazing at the metal safe deposit box sitting innocuously on the table. The key was still nestled in my pocket, and I retrieved it, taking a moment to examine its engravings. A single digit was etched upon its surface, the number 8. Although I couldn't place it, something about the key felt familiar. Without hesitation, I slid the key into the lock and twisted it slowly, feeling a faint click. The metal drawer glided open with ease, revealing a small stack of envelopes nestled within. I selected one, gingerly ripping open its seal. Inside was a slip of paper bearing 3 names, Lisa, James, and Sarah. Each was accompanied by a date, harkening back more than half a century ago. Carefully I picked up the remaining envelopes, laying them atop the first. Inside I discovered a succession of obituaries, each bearing the name and date of a deceased individual. My heart grew heavy as I came to realize that each person had met their untimely demise under dubious circumstances. Many had been young, in the prime of their lives, while others were well into their autumn years. Their bodies now rested in a nearby cemetery, all of them buried in close proximity to one another. I rose from my seat, my thoughts clouded with a foreboding sense of unease. As I glanced out of the window, I spotted Mr. Grider seated at a nearby cafe, his gaze fixed intently upon the branches of a towering tree. Clutching the documents in my hand, I stepped out of the bank and approached him. "You look troubled, my friend," he observed, his voice hushed. "What's the matter?" "I'm not quite sure how to say it," I replied hesitatingly. "It's just that the contents of these envelopes, they're all so peculiar." "How so?" he inquired. My voice trembled slightly as I spoke. "I recognize these names," and handed Mr. Grider the documents. "These are the names of people who died under mysterious circumstances." He scrutinized the papers for a protracted moment before responding, his voice tinged with melancholy. "These are my old friends and neighbors." "But why would anyone write their names on this list?" I inquired. Mr. Grider shook his head, his countenance filled with sorrow. "I don't know," he answered, "but one name on this list still lives. Lisa Trent. She's my neighbor, and I've known her for ages. She must be 80 by now, but maybe she can help answer your questions. Though I must warn you, the man who sent you is not to be trifled with. He may have saved my life, but judging by this list, it might have been by sheer luck." "Why do you say that?" I pressed, sensing the gravity of his words. "Because these people didn't die of natural causes," he whispered, his voice barely above a breath. "They were all murdered, and it's probable that they were all killed by the same person." "Murdered?" I repeated incredulously. "Yes, murdered," repeated Mr. Grider, his voice resolute. "You've come seeking answers, but I've learned that the truth can be a bitter pill to swallow. It took me years to recall the small details, the memories that helped me realize just how much I'd changed. At first, I couldn't comprehend what he'd done to me, but over time, it all began to make sense. I'm not the same man I once was. I'm not sure I ever was." "You mean to say that you're no longer human?" I asked incredulously. "Perhaps I never was," he replied. "After he awakened me, I felt like a different person altogether. The old man once asked me if I knew what it truly meant to be human, and I realized then that I never truly understood. Maybe it's just the haze of old age, but trust me when I say that everything around us is merely a mirage. There is no such thing as truth in this world." I regarded him skeptically, struggling to believe his words. "I've seen many strange things, Mr. Grider," I declared, "but what you're saying is the most peculiar thing I've ever heard." He simply smiled and shook his head. "I wish I could show you the things that I've seen, but I cannot." We lapsed into a contemplative silence, watching the world go by as we awaited our food. I ordered a sandwich and a cup of coffee, while Mr. Grider opted for a salad and water. Together we consumed our meals in silence, observing the passers-by. Once we'd finished, we paid the bill and exited into the warm sunlight. "You know, it's funny," Mr. Grider mused as we walked. "I always wondered what was inside that safe deposit box, but now it doesn't seem to matter at all." "Perhaps you should accompany me," I suggested. "The woman on the list may have more information that could be of use to you." "I am old," Mr. Grider replied solemnly. "Far too old for such dreams. I wish to remain who I am today. I do not want to change once more, only to pass shortly after. It's an amusing thought, isn't it? To die twice." With a soft chuckle he bid me farewell and ambled toward the bank, vanishing through its entrance. I returned home and slumped onto my couch, greeted by my furry feline companion. The cat leapt onto my lap, licking my face as I gently stroked him. My mind raced, pondering over what I'd witnessed and learned. There was undoubtedly something peculiar afoot, and I yearned to discover the identity of the individuals on the list. Scant information could be found online regarding their deaths, with most articles offering only scant and obscure details. However, the revelation that all of them had lived in the same neighborhood and perished within a brief time span piqued my interest. They were all young adults or children, none exceeding the age of 30. It seemed implausible for so many to perish in such close proximity, unless they were engaged in some dangerous or illicit activity. Day 4. I eagerly awaited my rendezvous with the lone survivor from the list, hoping to uncover the answers I sought. The following day, I arose early and sought out the woman's address online. She was affluent and resided in a palatial mansion located in the city's wealthiest district. She dwelt alone and had no family members nearby. Her abode was surrounded by verdant trees and shrubbery, obscuring it from view. I parked my car across the street and observed the birds fluttering amongst the branches, awaiting her reply. After several minutes of silence, the intercom finally crackled to life. A voice responded and asked my name. "I'm a private investigator," I explained. "I'm looking for Lisa Trent." "Come in," the voice replied calmly. I entered the garden behind the gate and found myself surrounded by the lushness of nature. There was a small lake with a fountain in the middle and a gazebo in the back. The path led through a grove of trees before reaching a magnificent mansion wrapped in ivy. A tall, thin man with black hair greeted me at the entrance, clad in a sharp suit and tie. He welcomed me with a polite smile and ushered me inside. "Miss Trent is expecting you," he said in a hushed tone. "Please make yourself at home." He led me into the house, where I found Lisa Trent waiting for me in the dining room. She rose from her seat and greeted me with a warm smile. "Good morning," she said amiably. "I am Lisa Trent." I shook her hand and felt how fragile and elderly she was. She looked fine for her age, but I could sense that her time was limited. "I'm sorry to disturb you," I said respectfully. "I came across your name on a list and thought you might be able to help me." "I see," she replied. "Please take a seat." We sat down, and her servant placed a heavy folder on the desk. "You're here because of the old man. Even I don't know his real name, and yet I once loved him more than anything. We were together for a few years, though we never officially married. He was always wealthy but never truly happy. When I was with him, he was different. He made me happy, and I made his life better. But there was an incident. Please open the folder." As I flipped through the heavy folder, I came across a photograph of a young couple standing in front of a building labeled Grider and Grider. The image must have been taken decades ago, judging by their outdated clothing. The man in the picture was a dead ringer for Mr. Grider, with his long blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, and chiseled jawline. It was uncanny. "That's me," said Miss Trent, noticing my shock. "And that's my husband, Thomas Grider. He died in a terrible accident just 2 years after that photo was taken." "Wait a minute," I said, connecting the dots. "Are you saying that Mr. Grider, the one who works at the bank, is your husband?" She gave a sad smile. "Yes and no. You see, when Thomas died, the old man approached me and promised to bring him back to life. I was desperate and believed him. He took Thomas's body away and returned him to me a month later, claiming that he had been able to resurrect him. But when Thomas came back, he wasn't the same. He didn't recognize me and he couldn't speak. The old man said it was a side effect of the procedure, and he promised that he would restore Thomas's memories. But he never did. Instead, Thomas disappeared for over a year, only to reappear living in a house on the outskirts of town. He didn't remember his past life, and he was a completely different person." Miss Trent's voice shook with emotion. "I've spent every penny I had trying to uncover the truth about what happened to my husband, and in that folder you'll find the names and addresses of everyone involved in the project. Maybe you can succeed where I have failed, and bring an end to this madness." Miss Trent handed me a bulky envelope filled with numerous documents and photographs. Each sheet had names, addresses, and dates written on them, which I quickly glanced at. "I'm sorry," I said, apologizing, "but why did you marry him? Only to use him to your advantage?" "No," she replied in a quiet voice. "I fell in love with him, and I still love him to this day." "He doesn't even know you exist, it seems." "That's true," she said with a sad smile. "He too has forgotten me. 2 husbands, and not one of them remembers. I have seen the true face of this world and of this old man." As I stood up to leave, Miss Trent wished me luck. Before leaving, I asked about the second face of the old man. It is not a second face, but more of his true being. When he is his younger self, his personality changes dramatically. This second face that only shows from time to time when he gets older, that is who he really is. It is just lost within all these forgotten memories. He is a broken soul. Be careful, young man. You are playing with fire. I walked away from her mansion, my mind still processing the information. Once I reached the bank, I entered and saw Mr. Grider sitting behind his desk, preoccupied with some paperwork. After contemplating for a moment, I decided not to tell him about his wife's revelation. I realized that he was too old to change his life again, and I was sure that the truth would only harm him further. I retreated to a cafe across the street where I sorted through the papers Miss Trent gave me. Most of the names were deceased until I stumbled upon Gary Hillman, one of the apprentices who worked on the project for a year. He was nearly 90 years old but was still alive, living a few hundred kilometers away from the city. I made my way there and arrived at his house in the early afternoon. His daughter greeted me at the door and showed me around the house, which contained several rooms full of pictures and souvenirs from his travels. We eventually arrived at a small room containing a large safe. My father built it himself. He always kept his secrets locked away so that no one else could access them, she explained. What kind of secrets? I inquired curiously. I'm not sure, she replied with a shrug. He never told me anything about it. He only showed it to me once when I was a child. May I see it? I asked. You'll have to ask him. He's the only one who knows the combination, she replied. I thanked her and departed from her residence. I waited for an hour until Mr. Hillman finally arose. He was startled to see me standing at his doorstep and welcomed me inside. He donned blue pajamas and his hair was unkempt, as if he hadn't combed it for days. He appeared perplexed at first, but then recalled the circumstances and greeted me with a warm smile. What brings you here? He inquired politely. I'm sorry to interrupt you, I began. I'm searching for information on a project you worked on many years ago. You're mistaken, he responded calmly. I haven't worked on any project in decades. I apologize, I responded contritely, but I believe you may have worked on something called the memory machine. Do you recall that? He gawked at me and leaned forward. I can't believe that you know about that, he whispered excitedly. How did you find out about that? I'm a private investigator and I'm working for someone who once financed this very project, I explained. Lisa Trent, formerly Miss Grider, indicated that she met with you and that you assisted her husband in recovering his memory following an accident, I appended with caution. He nodded slowly. Yes, I remember now, he spoke softly. I can still hear the screams of those poor people. They were so frightened of the machine, believing it would be their death. Did you ever meet the old man? The man who funded the entire operation? No, he didn't want anyone to know about it, Mr. Hillman replied. He feared that it would go awry and that innocent people would perish as a result. What about Mr. Grider? I heard that he was resurrected, I inquired further. Mr. Hillman solemnly shook his head. He was indeed brought back to life, but it was not as we had hoped. He was left unable to move or speak, essentially a shell of his former self. It took over a year for him to regain any sense of normalcy. The project was intended to help those who had lost their memories, particularly those with mental illnesses. We examined many patients, but I do not know what became of them. When Mr. Grider arrived at the facility, it was as if the project was solely aimed at him. Everyone was on edge. When the experiment failed, the fallout was immense. I am unsure of what we created, but it was not a resurrection. I'm sorry. I expressed my sincerest apology. Do you happen to have any information on the facility? Perhaps some old documents? Your daughter mentioned a safe. He gave me a sad smile. I do have some things in my safe, he replied, and I will be happy to assist you in your research. Together we climbed the stairs and unlocked the sturdy safe. Inside there were various folders filled with letters, photographs, and papers. One folder in particular piqued my interest. It contained a collection of newspaper clippings from around the world, seemingly belonging to a well-traveled individual. The folder was filled with photos of peculiar places and people. The articles described mysterious disappearances and unexplained deaths, many of which I recognized as being related to the case of Thomas Grider. "Thank you so much. You have been a tremendous help to me," I expressed my gratitude. "May I take these with me?" "Of course," he replied with kindness. "I hope you can put an end to this madness." I left Mr. Hillman's house with a bulky bag filled with files and newspapers. I sat in my car, scouring for the address of the facility, but all in vain. Mr. Hillman couldn't recall its location either. So I drove around the outskirts of the city until I stumbled upon an old bunker resembling the one in the photographs. I stood in front of the entrance, greeted by another number lock, but this time it was more difficult to crack. I attempted every combination I knew, but to no avail. After half an hour of trying, I gave up and left. As I walked away, I noticed a sign on the door that read, "Private property, no trespassing," beneath which some numbers were scratched into the metal. I memorized the code and went back to the bunker, and to my surprise, it worked. It was spooky to think about everything that the old man had left behind for me, but maybe it was just a coincidence, or some kids had stumbled upon the code and scratched it into the metal. As I entered the building, I followed the signs that led me to an elevator. I pressed the button and waited anxiously for the doors to open, and to my amazement, there was still electricity in this place. The lights flickered momentarily and then turned on fully. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside. I pressed the button for the third floor, labeled MX1, and watched as the elevator rose slowly upward. But just as I thought I'd reached my destination, the lift started to move downwards. The temperature dropped suddenly, and I heard the sound of the wind whistling through the air ducts. I exited the elevator and found myself in a spacious, empty room. There were no windows, and the walls were adorned with pipes and cables. In the center of the room stood a large machine, its purpose shrouded in mystery. I approached it cautiously, but it remained still and silent. Suddenly, without any warning, it started up. The lights flickered on, and I saw old dusty cabinets filled with countless files and folders at the back of the room. The machine's gears whirred loudly, and I could hear the humming of electrical motors and cooling fans. Small lights flashed on the console, and a screen lit up with a blinking light. I looked around and discovered several files labeled Memory Machine MX1, Project Morticia. I had finally found the place where the first Morticia had been created, and it was right in front of me. The machine humming in the center of the room was the very one that had made it possible. But this place was not as abandoned as I first thought. It seemed that the project had been resurrected 20 years ago and moved to a different laboratory, presumably the one where I had met with the doctor. As I searched through the files, I discovered that the old man had found many investors for his project, promising them eternal life. There were experiments beyond the official 15, with famous actors, politicians, and entrepreneurs among the test subjects. Most of them were already dead, and I wondered if their deaths were a result of these experiments. With several documents and photos in hand, I decided to confront the old man again. He had to know more after all that I had uncovered. As I drove home and spent the rest of the day poring over the files, I began to piece together what happened next. I knew there had to be more to this story. Suddenly, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find the old man being brought in by 2 armed men. I sat down on my couch, and the old man was placed opposite me. He looked tired and pale, but otherwise healthy. "What happened?" I asked, intrigued. He looked at me wearily. "I'm not foolish. I know you've been to the laboratory. Places like that are always under my watch. You want answers, don't you?" "And I want what was taken from me," he said, his voice rising in anger. "What are these Morticias exactly? What do you do with them?" I met Thomas Grider and saw what you did to him, but why? He let out a scornful laugh. You don't understand, do you? Let me explain it to you. Our brains are incredible machines, capable of feats that surpass even the most powerful supercomputers known to man, but we can't tap into this power. As we age, we lose this potential, and with it, we lose ourselves. All the memories we cherished are gone forever, but we can save them. Morticias are created using a biological essence extracted from the human brain. It's a complex electrical process called memory surge. I first theorized about it almost 300 years ago. When I founded the first laboratory, I created a basic version of what we know as morticias today. They could preserve mere seconds, a simple feeling, nothing more, but it proved my theory was correct. It took almost another century to create morticias like the one that was stolen from me. They can take you on a dreamlike journey and reawaken your memory completely, but there's a price to pay. When your memory returns, you lose another. To remember everything, you would need to create hundreds, if not thousands, of morticias. But the creation process is extremely difficult, and the human body can't handle more than 2 procedures. Many people don't even survive one, but I found a solution: transferring the memory to another person and extracting it through them. This would save my mind, but it would destroy theirs in the process. Again, I failed. This process not only extracted my memory, but also that of the host, diluting the truth even further. And here we are today, in the apartment of a young man who's incapable of finding what was lost, he finished, bitterness tinging his words. But why would you do this? I asked him softly. It was worth it, he answered simply. I knew my time was limited, and there was nothing left for me, but I was a person who strove for the true meaning of life. I wanted to be the one to conquer not only life, but also death. Are you saying you can bring them back? I asked him incredulously. Yes, yes, he yelled excitedly. I know how to do it, but it will take time. I cannot allow any memory to be lost. Can I trust you to find what was stolen from me? I know you understand me, and I believe you can do what no one else has done, he pleaded with me. I will find your Morticia. There are only 10 days left, but I'm close. I can feel it, I responded confidently. He smiled weakly. Thank you, he whispered. This will save humanity, he added, before he closed his eyes and fell asleep. The 2 armed men pushed him out of my apartment on his wheelchair and left without another word. I sat there and looked at all the files and photos, lighting a cigarette in silence. Mr. Hillman was right. There was much more to this facility than the official records showed. It seemed that there were several other projects besides the one that I had already discovered. And it wasn't just about preserving memories. It was also about creating new ones. Day 5. The morning after, I composed an electronic missive to Mr. Portman seeking his aid. It was a risky move, but I was left with no other options. To my surprise, Mr. Portman replied almost instantly, providing me with the coordinates of a reclusive scientist who had left society and taken up residence in the forest, some 250 kilometers away from the city. Without hesitation, I gathered my things and hit the road, following the path set out by Mr. Portman. To my relief, locating the scientist's wooden dwelling was easier than I initially anticipated. As I approached, a woman opened the door and warmly welcomed me inside. She introduced herself as Mrs. Jones and showed me to the living room, offering me a seat. The atmosphere was unassuming, yet immaculately maintained. A portrait of a man hung above the fireplace, offering me insight into the kind of person who resided here. I do apologize for intruding on your peace so early in the morning, I apologized respectfully. Not at all, she assured me, her tone effervescent. I was just making soup. Stay as long as you like. How did you come to know my husband? Mr. Portman directed me here, I replied promptly. She nodded slowly, recognition in her eyes. Ah, yes, I see. He's helped us on numerous occasions over the years. My husband is extremely grateful to him. I hope this is not an intrusive question, But may I ask how you met your husband? You seem much younger than him, I inquired curiously. Well, it's a tale in itself, she began. I've always been fond of stories and used to tell them to my children. Once they grew up and left, I decided to pursue my passion for writing and went on to pen books and articles until I became a renowned author. I met my husband at a book fair, and we tied the knot shortly thereafter. He has a heart of gold. My first husband passed away not long after our marriage, and I was left alone to raise our children. It was a trying time, and my husband had his own share of misfortune to endure. I suppose that's why we understood each other. And yes, he's grown old, but you'll soon find out that he still has plenty of fire left in him. I do not doubt that, I admitted candidly. What do you mean? Mrs. Jones asked skeptically. I need to ask your husband about a project he worked on many years ago. I am confident he remembers it, I clarified. I see, she responded before leading me through the house and into a small room where a man sat at a desk reading. His face lit up when he saw Mrs. Jones, and he stood up to embrace her warmly. She turned to me and said, This is the young man who wants to speak with you. Greetings, Mr. Jones. I am a private investigator working for an old employer of yours. I believe you know who I mean, I said calmly. He looked surprised. You know about this place? He asked excitedly. Mr. Portman provided me with your address. He believed you could help me with my case. A valuable Morticia was stolen from the old man, and I'm tasked with retrieving it. As I understand, you were involved in the creation process of such objects, I explained carefully. He smiled wryly. Yes, I was part of the team that created those machines. So you remember what happened then? I inquired eagerly. Yes, of course, he responded confidently. About 200 years ago, no, maybe even 250 years ago. I studied him closely, and he did not appear older than 60. There was something strange about him, something I couldn't quite identify. It was impossible for him to be as old as he claimed to be. How could you still be alive? The old man requires constant medical care and expensive procedures to stay alive. How could you simply exist? I asked, perplexed. That's a long story, he replied. Let's step outside. We walked outside and sat down at a table in the garden. Mrs. Jones served us coffee and sandwiches as we conversed. I know it must be perplexing for someone like you. I am not a simple human, you must understand. I am an android, he announced suddenly. I stared at him in astonishment. You are joking, right? No, I'm not, he replied solemnly. I was created in the same lab as the Morticias that were stolen from the old man. In fact, I was the machine that created them. I suppose he showed you the laboratory, or what remains of it. The machine inside is nothing more than an outdated power source. I was the key to creating the Morticias, at least in the past. All memories were transferred through my mechanical yet biological body. It was a monumental breakthrough at the time, as we could create a Morticia without harming the host. But the old man was never satisfied with what we produced. The Morticias were too weak, too brief, too meaningless to him. He dismissed me, and I have lived a mostly ordinary life since then. I know he watches me, and I know he always knows what I'm doing, but I am free nonetheless, he explained. But how can you be so certain about all of this? I questioned warily. Indeed, memories are an elusive thing in this world. Everything that I know might be nothing more than a fabrication of the old man's mind. Nonetheless, I have kept my own Morticias as tangible evidence of my existence, he chuckled. They serve as proof that I'm not yet insane. I see, I replied slowly. But why do you seek this Morticia for the old man? What is your connection to him? He inquired curiously. I am uncertain myself, I admitted candidly. All I know is that I must retrieve it. If you can provide any information about how it functions or how to utilize it, I would be appreciative. There is another laboratory nearby, not far from the one you have already seen. I will give you the key card that you require to gain access. Within, you will find a machine much like the one before. However, it will be able to interpret the code inscribed on the Morticias. If you connect yourself to this apparatus, you will be able to relive the memories that have been stored within the Morticia. But this comes at a heavy cost. With each memory accessed, you will lose a portion of yourself. It will not be apparent, as you will not remember losing anything. The path you have chosen is one of darkness. I hope you find what you seek, he warned gravely. I appreciate your help, I replied hurriedly. He nodded. You are welcome, he said, simply turning to walk towards his house. When he returned, he presented me with an ancient keycard and inquired, Memento Mori, have you heard of it? No, I answered hesitantly. It means remember death. A fitting name for a time like this, he added enigmatically. There is an organization that strives to impede the old man's work. For centuries they have fought against his experiments and progress. I want you to know that you are not alone. It's hard to remember these days, so many things are. Never forget, my friend, he concluded with a sad smile. Thank you again, I said, quietly rising to my feet to leave. I'm sorry, but I cannot assist you further, he apologized. You have exceeded expectations, my dear friend, I said to him, filled with gratitude. I will never forget the knowledge you have imparted upon me. Leaving the rustic abode behind, I drove back to the city, my thoughts in disarray. Upon reaching my apartment, I slumped onto my bed, drained from the day's events. There was something that eluded me, just beyond my reach, but its form was shapeless, and its grip intangible. Exhausted, I soon found myself slumbering deeply. Day 6. The next day I contacted Mr. Portman and divulged my findings. To my surprise, Dr. Jameson responded, requesting that I rendezvous with him at the old laboratory, where he promised to reveal more about the device. He also assured me that further information would be forthcoming. Upon arriving at the abandoned laboratory, I found Dr. Jameson seated by a small fire, nestled within a metal drum. Dr. Jameson? I queried, surprised by his unorthodox location. Indeed, he replied nonchalantly without looking up from his task. I hope I didn't startle you, I apologized. I'm quite used to surprises, he replied evenly. Mr. Portman is currently preoccupied, I'm afraid. I see, I said, disappointed. Shall we begin? Indeed, he assented, and we ventured into the laboratory. The machines hummed with an eerie cadence, as if they had been in constant operation since the dawn of time. It's been a while since anyone's been here, I remarked, my nerves on edge. Yes, quite some time, he agreed, but you've done well in finding the key card. I hope to unearth the true purpose of this place, I confided. Agreed, he said solemnly. We should start with the Morticias. They are the most important objects. The cabinets lining the walls contained numerous Morticias, though many appeared to be failures. These are the ones that worked at least once, he explained. They contain memories from hundreds of years ago. I opened a drawer to find a collection of Morticias inside. Photographs, letters, drawings, and poems, all of them intimate possessions from individuals who lived during the machine's creation. This one looks quite promising, Dr. Jameson pointed out a Morticia that resembled a book or diary. The Brooklyn Bridge, just like the Morticia that was pilfered from the old man. This has to be what we were searching for, I exclaimed in exhilaration. Yes, that is what I believe as well, he nodded. It is full of details, but there is nothing about how to operate it. You must have observed that there is no code on the surface. My head began to pound, and I felt as though I had been in this place before. There is a code, on page 17, I said slowly. Dr. Jameson retrieved the notebook and flipped through its pages until he found page 17. He handed me the book, and I read the words on the page carefully. The Morticia of the man who knew everything. The man who knew everything? What does that mean? I asked, perplexed. I don't know, he replied. But you were right. There is a code on this page. How did you know? I just knew, I said simply. It is challenging to explain. Well, let's attempt to decode it together then, he suggested. We need to link my body to this machine, I said, and pointed to the colossal machine in the center of the room. How do we do that? You can access the machine by inserting your card into the slot here, he explained. Then you will be able to open up the chest inside and put yourself into it. I have read about it in old journals, but I have never seen it in person. Are you sure about this? He inquired skeptically. I am, I replied confidently. He nodded and approached the machine, inserting the card into the slot. A few seconds later, the machine began whirring, and I could hear an odd sound emanating from within its black interior. It appears to be working, he said in surprise. He opened the chest, and I stepped into the machine. It was cold and dark, and I could not see anything except for a small light shining down from above me. The door closed behind me, and I heard Dr. Jameson's voice from outside, like the voice of God. You are now linked to the machine, he stated calmly. Now all you must do is remember what happened back then. I strained my mind to recall the memories locked within the Morticia, but to no avail. All that I could see was blinding light that forced me to shut my eyes. When I opened them again, I found myself standing in a city that I was certain was called New York, albeit several centuries ago. A multitude of people bustled past me, their faces obscured. I stumbled forward until a gentleman in a suit caught me. Are you all right, sir? We are close. Please bear with the pain a little longer, he said, offering me his arm. Thank you, I replied, grateful for his assistance, and followed him to the entrance of a colossal building. As we made our way through the lobby, an elderly man sitting on a bench addressed us. Ah, Magnus, I'm glad you made it. How was your research? He inquired cheerfully. Where am I? I asked, feeling weak and collapsing to the floor for a moment. In the blink of an eye, I lost control of my body as if I was observing from within. Enough with the pleasantries. We know why we're here. What about the bridge? Is everything in order? I demanded impatiently. Absolutely. Everything is fine, the old man responded, beaming. I hope so, because everything hinges on this. We need these people, and we need them now. If it works, it will alter the course of history forever, I warned him gravely. Yes, I am aware. Do not fret. It will succeed, he reassured me. But you must hurry. Time is of the essence. Understood, I said softly. The suited man ushered me out of the building and into a car that transported us to the Brooklyn Bridge. We entered a nearby building and climbed to the rooftop where a woman with a machine awaited us. Everything is ready, she announced as we arrived. Good. Time is running out, I said with anxiety. We must complete this before midnight. Everything is going according to plan, the woman said with a composed voice. If all goes well, the city will have forgotten by the stroke of midnight. Would you like to do the honors? No, that's your job, I responded hastily. Very well, she replied. Let's proceed. The woman turned towards the colossal machine beside her and pressed a button. A burst of electricity surged into the sky, stirring up a violent storm. The waves beneath the bridge swelled, and the water started to surge into the city. Vehicles crossing the bridge were thrown around by the tempestuous winds, and some were even flung over the side of the bridge. The scene was fraught with chaos, and the people ran in a panic. It's working, but we need more, I shouted, consumed by desperation. No, not yet, the woman hollered through the thunder, but I pushed the button again. The lightning grew stronger, and although the sky was cloaked in darkness, flashes of bright blue and red illuminated the city. The lightning struck buildings and reduced them to rubble. The city burned, and the fire spread like a wildfire. That's enough. Stop it now, she pleaded as I watched the Brooklyn Bridge crumble under the force of the waves. The water flooded the city and engulfed everything. People screamed and pleaded for help, but no one could hear them. The woman released the button, and the storm ceased abruptly. The sun emerged on the horizon, shining on the new world that had just been created. Now prove to me that it works, I said, handing her an object that I couldn't quite discern. She gazed at it for a moment, then looked back at me, flabbergasted. This is impossible, she whispered, taken aback. You have really done it. I have never witnessed anything like this. And if it works, you won't remember it, I added icily. Make sure that it does. She nodded mutely and inserted the mysterious device into her machine. It's ready, she said, and pressed a button. I jolted back to reality, my body trembling with electricity, as my eyes fluttered open. I was sprawled on the floor of the lab, disoriented and dizzy, with a pounding headache. Despite Dr. Jameson's frantic attempts to revive me, I could hear nothing but a dull, muffled ringing in my ears. Finally, as if awaking from a dream, I drew in a sharp breath and managed to sit upright. What happened? I asked, struggling to regain my bearings. You fainted, Dr. Jameson explained urgently. You were speaking incoherently, as if you were someone else. But then you lost consciousness and reverted back to yourself. I had to pull you out of the machine as quickly as possible. What did you see? He prodded eagerly. I saw a city on fire, I recounted slowly. People were screaming and fleeing from something they couldn't understand. What city? He pressed. Do you remember anything else? It was New York, I replied, my voice trembling. It was different from this city, old, ancient, and it was being destroyed. Dr. Jameson shook his head in disbelief. This is impossible. No city could be destroyed without anyone knowing about it. Are you sure it was called New York? Was it related to the bridge you mentioned earlier? I don't know, I admitted. All I saw was the destruction and chaos. The gravity of the situation began to weigh heavily on us both. Perhaps it wasn't a different reality, Dr. Jameson mused thoughtfully. Maybe you witnessed an actual historical event through the Morticia. I think that's what happened, I agreed with a nod. Suddenly, a bolt of electricity coursed through my body, blinding me with light and jolting me with a sudden vision. I saw the face of a man I knew, the mayor of the city. Dr. Jameson caught me as I convulsed, struggling to stabilize me. What's happening? He demanded, panicked. I've seen the mayor, Tom Klein. I think he knows about this, I gasped, breathless. Tom Klein? Dr. Jameson repeated, incredulous. I've never heard of him. He was the mayor of New York hundreds of years ago, I explained haltingly. He had dark hair and glasses, wore a blue-striped suit, and had a small nose. How do you know this? Dr. Jameson asked, his eyes wide with alarm. I don't know, I said, shaking my head. It's like I'm remembering what I've seen, but it's not really me. We need to get you out of here, he said urgently, leading me toward the door. Who's the mayor of this city today? I asked suddenly. Thomas F. Kruger, he answered quickly. And where does he reside? I asked, my mind already buzzing with potential plans. I don't know, but I don't think that you'll just stroll into his home. Perhaps we should attempt to contact him first. Are you certain he knows something? He questioned uncertainly. Yes, I'm positive, I replied confidently. Let's visit his office. Dr. Jameson pulled his car into a parking lot adjacent to a large building in the city's heart, and we entered. We boarded an elevator and ascended numerous floors until we arrived at the top. The doors opened automatically, and we stepped out into a hallway lined with glass walls. This is the mayor's office, he whispered, as we strolled past a secretary typing at her desk. This appears to be a typical office, I said, perplexed. Are you certain the mayor will be here? Yes, he's always here during the day, he affirmed. Come on, let's take a seat. We sat down in front of a long table filled with documents and files. A man walked in and stopped upon seeing us. He was dressed in a black suit and had short brown hair. How may I assist you, gentlemen? He asked politely. We would like to speak with the mayor regarding a matter of great significance, Dr. Jameson explained. I'm sorry, but the mayor is currently occupied, the man apologized. Could we schedule an appointment, at the very least? It concerns a city named New York, I interjected hastily. I see. Well, the mayor is currently meeting with city council representatives to discuss several important issues related to the future of our city, he replied carefully. However, if you leave your contact information, he may get back to you later. No, we won't take up much of his time, I insisted. I understand, he replied and exited the room, returning several minutes later with a note. You will find the information you require at this location. Do not share this with anyone, he cautioned us before departing once more. We're close to uncovering what happened to the old man, Dr. Jameson said excitedly. We still have many unanswered questions, I replied, concerned. This is outside the city and during the night. I'm not sure about this. Will you accompany me, Doctor? I'm sorry, but I can't. I'll inform Mr. Portman of what we discovered today. Be careful out there, he advised before exiting the office. I glanced around for a moment before snatching the note from the table. I then followed the directions and soon found myself standing outside a massive stone and iron building at night. It was chilly, and I lit a cigarette while waiting for something to happen. After some time, a tall man in a black suit, similar to the one the man in the mayor's office wore, walked out of the building and headed toward me. Surprised the mayor didn't show, I muttered, but the man beside me remained silent. Suddenly he pulled out a small knife and lunged at me. I dodged as best I could, but he landed a deep gut wound before running away. I stumbled back to my car with the knife still lodged in my stomach. The drive home was agonizing, blood pooling in my apartment, and my cat anxiously watching over me. I managed to contact Mr. Portman before losing consciousness. Day 9. When I awoke, I found myself in a hospital room with Mr. Portman sitting beside my bed. "How do you feel?" he asked me softly. "I'll live," I replied, my voice hoarse. "What happened?" "You were attacked and stabbed," he informed me calmly. "But you're in a secret facility now. The old man doesn't know about this place." I saw a memory of the old man, a city called New York, and the mayor, I murmured, fear and excitement coursing through me. Maybe I was wrong? "No," Mr. Portman said firmly. "Your experience with the Morticia is valuable to us. I've arranged for a new identity for you. Once you've recovered, we'll continue. Your wounds will heal fast." And heal they did. Within hours, I felt like I was born anew, my body burning as though remade. Mr. Portman arrived with documents and clothing, and soon we were off again. "We're running out of time," he told me urgently. "We have to infiltrate the laboratory where you were before. My sources say the old man is barely conscious most of the time. We'll use this chance to our advantage." "But won't they recognize me?" I asked skeptically. "Maybe someone else would be better suited?" "No, you'll be fine," he reassured me. "Just stay calm and follow my instructions." He led me through the city streets to a building with a door code, inside which lay an array of wigs, jackets, shoes, and pants. I quickly chose a disguise, and Mr. Portman returned to pick me up in his car. "Everything is ready," he said quickly. "Get in." As I climbed into the back seat, I knew I was getting closer to the answers I sought. But at what cost? "Here, take this," he said urgently, handing me a small black card with a blue logo on it. "You'll be going in as an investor, and they'll show you around the lab. Inside you'll see a locked room labeled CCI, which stands for Camera Cogitationum Inquietae. There, you'll find a folder marked with several red labels. You'll recognize it when you see it. Take the folder and leave without them noticing. This key card will give you access to the room. There's just this one chance. If you miss it, we will fail." I looked down at the card in my hand, feeling a sense of urgency and paranoia creeping up on me. "I'm not sure who I can trust anymore," I muttered to myself. "I'm not even sure if I can trust myself. I feel like I've forgotten everything." Mr. Portman gave me a friendly pat on the shoulder before getting out of the car. "You'll be fine. I'm sure of it," he said comfortingly. The car drove off, leaving me alone outside the laboratory. Dr. Haley, a young woman wearing a white coat and her hair in a bun, greeted me at the door. "I am Dr. Haley. Welcome to the facility," she said, shaking my hand firmly. "How was your flight?" "It was fine," I replied shakily. "I'm here to visit the old man. Unfortunately, he cannot be here with us today, but I'll be giving you a tour nonetheless," she said politely. "The meeting will take place next week. He wants you to know that he's sorry, but it's unavoidable." "I understand," I said, my nerves increasing as we entered the building. People stared at me strangely, making me uneasy, and I kept looking over my shoulder every few seconds. "Do you have any questions so far?" Dr. Haley asked me after showing me a room filled with machines and computers. "No, not really," I lied. "I don't know anything about these things. I'm more interested in seeing that everything is working. An investment for me is knowing where I can put my trust." Of course," she laughed. "Let's continue then." Dr. Haley led me to a large metal door, which she unlocked with a keycard. We entered a long hallway lined with doors, and she stopped in front of one of them. "This is the first room where the morticias are created," she told me. "It's also where the experiments take place that create new mortici." In the distance, I caught a glimpse of a door that resembled the one Mr. Portman had described. Dr. Haley continued to talk about the financial side of the industry, explaining how investors funded their research and how they were paid back with interest. She emphasized how many lives could be saved with this technology and the good that could be accomplished. I listened intently, but kept my thoughts to myself. As we reached the door, I asked her to direct me to the restrooms. "Of course, right this way," she said with a smile, leading me back down the hall. "I'll be waiting for you in the room to the left. Just follow the hallway, and you'll find me. Would you like some coffee?" she offered kindly. "That sounds lovely," I replied, grateful for the brief moment of respite. Inside the restroom, I washed my hands and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale, and my eyes were bloodshot. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, and I tried to steady my nerves. I had no idea why I was here or what was going on, but I knew I had to stay. Glancing down at my stomach, I found no signs of a wound, not even a scar. I was certain this had to be a dream, yet everything felt too real. Who was Mr. Portman? And why did I feel like I was part of the old man's plan to steal the folder? Perhaps there was nothing to fear after all. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through my head and stomach, and I had to sit down on one of the toilets to recover. My hands trembled, and sweat poured down my forehead, but I had to press on. I had come too far to back down now, even though I knew so little. What was this feeling that kept dragging me further into the unknown? Was any of this real, or was I just a figment of someone's imagination? I stood up and went back to the hall. There was nobody there when I arrived, and I went straight to the door Mr. Portman had described. I opened it with the key card and found the folder in one of the cabinets. It was labeled with several red labels and contained all kinds of documents and pictures. I made my way back to the hallway, my heart racing and my mind consumed by the gravity of what I had just discovered. The silence was oppressive, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I needed to get out of there as soon as possible. In the distance, I heard footsteps echoing through the hallway. My muscles tensed, and I held my breath, praying that whoever it was would pass me by. The sound grew louder, closer, until finally it stopped right outside the restroom door. For a few agonizing moments there was only silence. Then the doorknob rattled and I knew I was in trouble. I braced myself, ready to fight or flee, when suddenly the doorknob stopped moving and the footsteps retreated back down the hallway. I waited a few more minutes, listening for any signs of pursuit, but the silence held. Taking a deep breath, I made my way back to the door I had opened earlier and inserted the key card once again. The door slid open, revealing a room filled with metal cabinets. Each one was labeled with a different code, but I knew the one I was looking for. The folder marked with several red labels. I quickly found it, tucked away in the corner of one of the cabinets. My hands shook as I opened the folder, revealing a wealth of documents and photographs. My eyes scanned the pages, taking in the horrors of what had been done to these innocent people. As I looked closer, I saw the name Hacksmith written on most of the documents. The Hacksmith killer was a notorious serial killer from 20 or 30 years ago. I had read countless books and watched numerous documentaries about the case, but this folder seemed to reveal that he never existed. All of this was just a ruse to conceal the development of something dark and sinister. A new kind of morticia, capable of preserving more than just a single memory or emotion. Mr. Portman undoubtedly sought to uncover what the old man had discovered through these murderous trials. But I no longer knew if I could trust him. Sweat beaded on my forehead as I closed the folder and returned it to its original place. My mind was a blur of confusion and fear, and I knew I needed to get out of there before I was caught. With one last glance around the room, I slipped out the door and made my way back down the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. As I approached the room where Dr. Haley waited, I could feel a weight on my chest. What was I supposed to do with this information? Was it my duty to expose the truth, or would that only bring danger upon myself? For now, all I could do was bide my time and wait for the right moment to act. I entered the room where Dr. Haley awaited my return. Her smile was warm and welcoming, putting me slightly at ease. "How are you feeling?" she inquired kindly. "I'm all right," I replied unconvincingly, attempting to mask the anxiety coursing through me. I had something that didn't agree with me. "Here," she offered, pouring me a cup of coffee. "Perhaps this will help settle your stomach." "Thank you," I said, taking the cup from her. "I don't have any further questions. I really should be going now," I added, setting the cup down on her desk. "Of course," she said, nodding understandingly. "It was nice meeting you." With that, she escorted me back to the entrance of the laboratory, where the same driver awaited my return. I took my seat in the car, waiting anxiously as we drove a few kilometers until we picked up Mr. Portman. He looked different than when I had last seen him, but his demeanor was still the same. "We're almost there," he informed me, the excitement palpable in his voice. When the car came to a stop, he immediately inquired about the folder. "Did you find it?" he asked eagerly. "No," I replied, trying to keep my tone steady. "There was no folder in that room that matched your description. I did the best I could, but I ran out of time." "I see," he said, his disappointment thinly veiled. "The driver will take you home. I'll be in touch soon." As that car cruised down the city streets, the magnitude of what I'd just done came crashing down on me like a tidal wave. Had Mr. Portman caught on to my deceitful ways? Was this some kind of twisted trial to test my loyalty? No matter the answer, there was no way in hell I was going to just hand over sensitive intel without first getting a glimpse of what he had planned. Upon arrival at my humble abode, I bolted the door shut behind me, the exhaustion seeping through my bones like a virus. My head throbbed, and my stomach churned, reminding me of the recent events that had unfolded. With a deep sigh, I collapsed onto my mattress, fighting to clear my mind and attain even a modicum of tranquility. Day 10. I awoke drenched in sweat, the pain of the day's events coursing through my veins like an epidemic I couldn't shake. I hobbled into the kitchen, my whole body aching, and reached for a glass of water. But there on the table lay a sealed letter, taunting me with its secrecy. And as I ripped it open, the words etched onto its surface came into view. "In winter's grasp we meet our end. As snow descends, our souls ascend. The cold embrace we can't defend. Our lives are like the frozen land, where stillness reigns and silence grand. In winter's grasp we meet our end. The days grow short, our time to spend. As shadows lengthen we apprehend. The cold embrace we can't defend. The world turns bleak, and we descend, as all around us life suspends. In winter's grasp we meet our end. We face the truth, we can't pretend. Our journey done, our fate to blend. The cold embrace we can't defend. But in this season we transcend, to join the stars, our journey's end. In winter's grasp we meet our end. The cold embrace we can't defend. The poem was a dark verse, a macabre meditation on death that left me uneasy. I went online to dig up information on its author, and lo and behold, I discovered that he was once a resident of this very city. Scribbling down his address, I gathered my nerves and braced myself for what lay ahead. My hands were trembling, and I surveyed my apartment, still a grisly testament to the horrors that had occurred within its walls. Fearing the worst, I resolved to ask my neighbor to care for my cat while I was away. The prospect of what lay ahead was daunting, but some inexplicable force within me urged me onward, as though I was fated to confront my own mortality at the hands of the decrepit old man. After entrusting my furry companion to my neighbor, I cast a final glance around the squalor of my abode, catching a glimpse of my own haggard reflection in the mirror. Was I a shattered man, ruined beyond repair by the ordeal I had endured? Or had I somehow been transformed, enlightened in ways I could not yet comprehend? As I emerged from my darkened lair and squinted against the harsh light of day, I realized with a start that I couldn't even remember where I had parked my car. Uncertainty gnawing at my gut, I summoned a taxi instead. The driver dropped me off at the designated address, an abandoned mansion that had seen better days. The place was breathtaking, and for some reason, it stirred something deep within me. I didn't hesitate to force my way inside. Once in, I saw photographs of Mr. Portman and his kin scattered about, which told me that this had once been their abode. The interior was gorgeous, despite the thick layers of dust that covered everything. I could picture how it must have looked in its prime. There was a file sitting on the living room's mahogany table, and it was undoubtedly left there by Portman himself. He knew that I had gone against him, and had something to show me. Most of the files inside had official stamps and signs on them, and they were old government files. One file in particular caught my eye with the words, "The Memento Mori program," etched on it. It was clear that Portman was the head honcho of it all. None of this came as a surprise to me, and I was confident that even he had been working for the old man before. Everything was beginning to fall into place, and I had a feeling that this was all part of an elaborate test. The files were littered with clues that would lead me to another address, a rundown zoo. I closed the file, left the mansion, and headed towards my next destination. It was a pity that things had come to this, but it seemed like we were all stuck in a time loop that we couldn't break out of. As I strode towards the zoo, the sun was already a sliver on the horizon. The gate was shut tight, no easy entry to be had. In my fumbling attempts to pry the lock open, an old man sidled up beside me. His coat was long, his hat's brim casting a shadow over his face. With a slow gait, he moved closer until only a few meters separated us. "Are you searching for someone?" I asked, the stranger's face still shrouded from view. "It's you who's searching," he countered. "Me? Why'd you say that?" My confusion was palpable. "Because you desire to unearth what's buried under these ruins?" I stepped back, wary. "What gives you that impression?" "Because you don't belong. You're too young for this place. Your heart's still too warm." I didn't understand what he was getting at, and closed the distance between us. "I'm here because of the Memento Mori program. This is where they used to meet. I want to uncover the truth. I'll tell you what you need to know, but first you have to answer some questions." "What kind of questions?" I asked, my nerves frayed. Oh, Father, where have you gone? The news of your suicide, it hits like a bomb, and just like that, your life is done, leaving us all to pick up the crumbs. But it's not just you who's met their end. The God we knew, he's gone as well. A deity once strong, once our friend, now lies silent in a hollow shell. The world seems darker now. No light, no purpose, no meaning, no divine right. We're left to ponder what it all means as we mourn your death, and his demise it seems, but maybe it's not all for naught. Maybe in death there's a lesson taught that life is fragile and all must end, but it's up to us to make amends, to cherish what we have and hold it tight, to live each day like it's our last night, to remember those we've lost and keep them close and hope that somehow they're watching as we grow. So here's to you, O Father, and to God above. May your passing remind us of love, of the beauty in life, and the pain of the light that shines. Even in the rain, rest in peace, dear Father, and God as well. Your memory will live on in stories we tell, and maybe, just maybe, in death, we'll find a way to keep living with purpose in mind." He recited in song. "What does this mean?" I asked him. "It is a poem about death and the afterlife," he answered. "I don't understand." "I do not expect you to," he said calmly. "I just expect you to answer," he continued. "I can't answer anything if I don't know what you want me to answer," I told him. "Maybe you are not ready yet," he said, and turned around to leave. "Wait, so you have sent me this letter? Please, you must help me. What do you want to tell me?" I pleaded. He paused for a moment, and then he spoke. "I have heard your prayers and I have seen your tears. They are not enough. You must give me something in return." "What do you want me to do? You have to stop with the riddles," I screamed at him in anger. "You must die for me," he told me. "What?" I asked, surprised. "You must kill yourself for my sake. It is the only way." "What do you mean?" I asked angrily. "You must take your own life. There is no other way." "The old man has sent you here because he wants you to do so. If you refuse, he will come himself. You have to swear to me that you will do the right thing once the time comes," he told me. "Why should I trust you?" I asked suspiciously. "You could be lying to me. You must believe me when I say that I never lie. But if you choose not to do what I ask of you, then all will start again," he answered. "What do you mean?" I asked, frightened. "I think you should follow me. I will trust you," he said, and walked away from me into the darkening shadows of the zoo. I trailed behind him as we passed through the gates and descended a pathway toward a looming edifice constructed of formidable concrete blocks. We traversed into a room where an old weathered desk stood, and a solitary light bulb hung overhead, casting a feeble glow. He then revealed a concealed switch cunningly disguised behind the head of an ancient gnu that was mounted on the wall, and when he flicked it, a part of the wall retreated, revealing a concealed glass window. Beyond the portal, I witnessed an array of instruments and machines that must have been employed on fauna, and a metallic table was placed directly in front of the pane. An array of animal crania lay sprawled out on the table's surface, some adorned with horns or antlers jutting out of their skulls, while others were plain. All of them appeared dead, and every last one had been plucked from some type of animal. I stammered in disbelief. "Are these animal morticias? How can this be possible?" "This is where animals were dispatched before they were dismembered," he informed me. "They were placed in this machine, and their vital essence was siphoned from them until they passed away. We had hoped to use these animals to save the host's memories, but we were unsuccessful for many years. The old man himself is culpable for entire ecosystems collapsing and disappearing. Our world teeters on the brink of oblivion because of him, and he has caused us all to forget," he explained. "How did he manage to do that?" I inquired, taken aback. "I am uncertain of how he accomplished it, but he has been doing it for centuries now. He is the one who created the Memento Mori program, but his objectives changed over time. He did not want death to exist at all. Mr. Portman, the man whose abode you visited, has reactivated the program, but you should not trust him either. He merely desires to supplant the old man and resume where the program left off. The same immortality that the old man achieved would be enough for him. But neither of them understands that there is no immortality in this world, nor is there death. There is only life," he continued. "I don't understand. What are you trying to say?" I asked with confusion. "This is what I've been attempting to show you from the beginning," he said as he grabbed a long knife from the table and approached me slowly. "When we die, we don't just disappear. We transform into something else. Nothing is ever entirely destroyed. The old man believes that this human form, this reality that he was born into, should be absolute, but that's not sustainable. And one day he'll have turned this world into ashes. I can see in your eyes that you comprehend what I'm saying. I cannot compel you to do what must be done, but I can demonstrate what happened and what will happen. You'll have to face this decision alone, and I don't know if there's another way. Please understand that the old man is not malevolent, and neither is Mr. Portman. They want to see their loved ones again, and they desire eternal happiness for all, but they're unaware of the destruction they're causing. I want you to open your eyes. Don't follow these blind men into the darkness." He finished, and raised the knife high above his head. "Wait, what are you doing?" I yelled. "You must kill yourself," he replied calmly, and then slowly pushed the knife into my hand. "The time will come, and you will know when it has," he added before disappearing through a concealed door in the wall. I stood there in shock for a moment. I had anticipated him telling me to find the Morticia or something, but instead he wanted me to take my own life. I took the knife into my hand and saw that something was etched into the blade. Applebaum. I had heard this name before. It was a kindergarten near my place. The Applebaum family had always been close to us. Perhaps this was where it would all end. I pocketed the knife and left the zoo behind. Instead of driving home, I was ready for it all to end. I called another taxi and asked the driver to stop a few kilometers away from where I wanted to go. I needed some time to think. I lit one of my last cigarettes and thought about my life. I wondered if I ever had a choice. It was as if I was ready to wake up from a terrible nightmare. I thought that I understood all of it, and yet I knew nothing. These streets, they are a part of me, a remnant of my youth, a time long gone, but still fresh in my mind. Memories of all the people I've met, all the choices I've made, all here, all now. But maybe none of it ever happened. Maybe it was all just a figment of my imagination. That thought lingered in my mind as I approached the Morticia. As I looked upon the memories of death contained within, I knew that this was no ordinary recollection. It was a trigger for something more, something sinister. The headaches, the feeling of constant remembrance, like a never-ending wave, sweeping away my life. I sat down on a bench, my mind a whirlwind of confusion. Was I ever here before? Why do I remember this place? After finishing my cigarette, I stood up and approached the building. The door was open, a light still on inside. "Are you ready?" A voice from the shadows called out to me. The man from the zoo emerged, beckoning me to sit down. He handed me a glass filled with a dark liquid. "Drink it all," he said, a twisted smile on his face. "It's a very strong poison. I brewed it myself." Suspicion crept over me. "How do you know so much about me?" I asked. "You don't remember anything, do you?" he answered. "But you will soon. You will remember everything once you see it." "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my fear turning to anger. "Because you need to die," he said calmly. "We all have to die, even those who found a way to sustain. It is natural. Look at this picture, do you remember?" he continued, thrusting an old photograph into my hand. It depicted young children playing in the very facility we were in. "I don't understand," I said, confusion taking hold. "They are dead now, but they were alive once upon a time. This is the only thing we have left of them, the only proof that they ever existed," he explained. "But you don't remember them, because he made you forget. You don't remember me. I was one of these children just like you. I managed to escape. I managed to survive because they forgot about me. Now I try my best to stop them. I try to make you remember because you were chosen. You are the one he chose," he said, his eyes boring into mine, daring me to deny it. "I can't recollect a thing," I muttered. "You will," he declared, self-assured. "You still got the knife? Put it on the table," he directed. I fished the knife from my pocket, sensing its warmth and faint throbbing in my palm. I set it down and awaited his next bidding. "Stare at that knife. Focus on it. Don't you dare look away," he commanded, gripping my hands. There was an old apple tree, sturdy and tall as could be. She stood there through all seasons, braving winds and weather treasons. In spring she blossomed with glee. Her branches swayed to and fro in harmony, as the wind gently carried the bees, pollinating the blossoms with ease. In summer she bore fruit aplenty, juicy apples, sweet and tasty. Her branches bowed down with pride, as the wind blew, a gentle guide. In fall her leaves turned golden brown, and the wind rustled them all around. They danced and swirled in the breeze, a beautiful sight to see with ease. And in winter the wind blew cold, covering her in a blanket of snow so bold. She stood there dormant and strong, waiting patiently for spring to come along. As the years passed, the tree grew old, her trunk gnarled and her branches bold, but still she stood tall and true, an inspiration for me and you, he retold in song. When he finished, I remembered the rest of the poem and continued, "For just like the old apple tree, we too must grow, change and be, and though the winds of life may blow, we can stand strong and still grow. So let us take a lesson from the old tree and embrace the winds of change with glee, for like the tree, we too can be strong, beautiful, and free." He took his hand from mine and peered at me with eyes like polished stones, his expression filled with a gratefulness that seemed almost holy. "I'm glad to be here today of all days. You're the one I knew I could count on, even before we knew what it meant to truly live, before we ever laid eyes on that old man." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I always knew you were the one above all." Then, with a sense of gravity that sent shivers down my spine, he declared, "I'm going to tell you a story. It's a long one, but it needs to be told. And when I'm finished, I want you to answer one simple question. After that, I'll be on my way. I trust your wisdom to guide you, understand?" "Yes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Good." He settled back into his chair, his face serious, and began to spin his tale. Once upon a time, in a small village nestled in the mountains, there lived an old man. He was known for his love of experimentation and his search for the elixir of life. Many children in the village were curious about his work and would often gather around his workshop to watch him tinker with his tools and potions. The old man was kind to the children and would always let them help him with his experiments. They would mix ingredients, grind herbs, and stir the bubbling liquids in his cauldron. The children were fascinated by the old man's work and would listen intently as he explained the properties of the different ingredients. As time passed, the old man's experiments became more and more ambitious. He wanted to find a way to extend his life and continue his work for as long as possible. The children were happy to help him, but they began to notice changes in the old man. His skin became wrinkled and his hair turned grey. One day, the old man asked the children to help him with his most ambitious experiment yet. He wanted to create a potion that would grant him eternal life. The children were hesitant, but the old man reassured them that he had everything under control. The old man mixed the ingredients carefully and poured the potion into a small vial. He drank it eagerly, and the children watched in awe as his body began to glow. For a moment, it seemed as though the old man had achieved his goal. But then something strange happened. The old man began to shrink and shrivel up like a prune. His skin became paper-thin, and his eyes turned milky white. The children were scared, but the old man just smiled and said, "Don't worry, my children. This is just a temporary setback. I'll figure it out eventually." The old man's experiment had failed, but he didn't give up. He continued to work tirelessly, using the knowledge he had gained from his past failures to improve his potions. And the children continued to help him, despite their fears. Years went by, and the old man grew weaker and weaker, but he never gave up hope. He knew that one day he would find the elixir of life and achieve his goal. As the old man's health continued to decline, he became more desperate to find a way to extend his life. He started to experiment with different methods and ingredients, but nothing seemed to work. One day, the old man had an idea. He realized that the children who had been helping him all these years had their whole lives ahead of them. He wondered if he could somehow harness their life essence to prolong his own life. The old man called the children to his workshop and asked them to help him with a new experiment. He told them that he had discovered a way to make them all live forever, but he needed their help. The children were excited and eager to help. They trusted the old man and believed that he had their best interests at heart. The old man gave them each a potion to drink, telling them that it would make them immortal. As the children drank the potion, they began to feel strange. Their bodies grew weak, and they fell to the ground. The old man watched as their life essence drained from their bodies and into his own. He felt rejuvenated, stronger than he had in years. But the old man knew that he had done something terrible. He had stolen the children's lives to prolong his own, and he couldn't let anyone find out. He mixed a potent poison and gave it to the children, telling them that it would help them forget what had happened. The children drank the poison and soon forgot about their friends who had been killed. They continued to help the old man with his experiments, unaware of the darkness that had taken hold in his heart. Years passed, and the old man grew stronger and stronger, but he was haunted by the memories of what he had done. He realized that he had become a monster, and he couldn't bear to live with the guilt any longer. The old man knew that he couldn't undo the terrible things he had done, but he couldn't bear to live with the constant reminder of his actions. He knew he needed to find a way to keep his memories, but not have to actively remember them. After much thought, the old man came up with a plan. He would create a potion that would allow him to store his memories away in a safe place where they couldn't haunt him anymore. He worked tirelessly on the potion, trying different combinations of ingredients until he finally found the perfect one. He drank the potion and felt his memories slipping away from him, but not disappearing altogether. They were there but distant and faded, like a dream he could barely remember. The old man felt a sense of relief wash over him. He could now live the rest of his life without the constant guilt and shame of what he had done, hoping that one day all of it would lead him to the elixir he desired so much. I sat there staring at the man in mute confusion. What did he want from me? What could I possibly offer him? Then, like a clap of thunder, he spoke. I have a question for you. What is man? I furrowed my brow, my mind racing to catch up with his enigmatic query. What do you mean? He leaned in, his breath hot against my ear. The same thing the old man asked you, but now it's time for you to answer. I felt a shiver run down my spine. What was the meaning of all this? We're human, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. That's what we are. He shook his head, a wry smile twisting his lips. No, my friend, that's not what I mean. What do we really know about ourselves? I pondered his words for a moment, searching for an answer that would satisfy him. We're capable of feeling and thinking, of creating and reasoning. But he was not appeased. All these things you're talking about are just empty shells. Think harder. What is man? He paused, fixing me with his dark eyes. I don't want your answer now, but I will someday. You were chosen for a reason, but you'll also have to choose. His voice dropped to a whisper. I'm glad we met again. And with that, he disappeared into the shadows, leaving me alone in the dark room, my mind reeling. What did he mean? What was I supposed to do? I took a deep breath and made my way home, haunted by the words of the strange man. As I opened the door, a shiver of apprehension ran down my spine, informing me that I wasn't alone. Despite my weariness and enfeeblement, I kept the knife clasped tightly in my pocket as I made my way inside. What a day it has been. Sit down, we have to talk, Mr. Portman declared ominously, lurking in the dark corner of the room. Taking a seat on the couch, I waited for him to continue, sensing that something momentous was about to unfold. I've spoken with some people today, and I'm afraid that our time together is coming to an end, he lamented sorrowfully, his gaze fixed on me. Don't get me wrong, I appreciate you coming back to us and doing your best to help us. But the old man has made his move. I'll have to respond, and I'll do my utmost to make it count. My heart pounding with anxiety, I held onto the blade in my pocket. What exactly are you suggesting? I inquired nervously. You're going to be put to the test, he answered icily. It's simple. If you don't pass, you'll be stranded here for eternity. If you do, you'll stay with us. I can't tell you what to do, and I'm afraid of the choices you'll make. You've probably realized the truth by now, haven't you? What are you talking about? I asked, bewildered. Don't play dumb with me, kid. You're smart enough to figure out what's really going on, even if you didn't see it from the outset. It's a lot to take in, and I can't risk corrupting your memories. Not yet, anyway. I'm giving you a chance to get out. This is a one-time opportunity, and you should consider it carefully. Kill the old man. End it tomorrow, the day after, but deal with him before the weekends. This world isn't what it seems, and none of those people out there are alive anymore. They don't know the truth like we do. His words hung heavy in the air, resonating in the stillness of the room. He was right, of course. The old man had spun his web of deceit, spinning his lies and dispatching those poor children without a second thought. No hero, this one. A monster in human clothing. And yet I couldn't help but question everything I knew to be true. Was there any morality left in this world? Would taking out the old man make any difference at all? Could this project ever be stopped? I'll need some time to consider my options, Mr. Portman, I said, my voice heavy with defeat. I know I failed you, but you know why. Ever since I touched that Morticia, ever since I saw that vision, everything has changed. I emerged from the machine a different man, as if I'd been reborn. But the price of that rebirth has been steep. Maybe it's awakened me, the real me, I said, my lips twisting into a sad smile. Portman nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. You're wise beyond your years, kid. You may not realize it, but you're special. You're in a unique position to change the world forever. It's not just the choice of a lifetime, it's a choice that will define your very existence. I know it's scary, but you must face your fears and overcome them. Remember who you once were. Remember what you felt when you were young. Remember what you want to see in this world. Never forget that darkness begets darkness, he said, rising slowly from his chair. Good luck, kid, he said, pausing at the door. I hope you make the right decision. Goodbye. With that, he was gone, leaving me to my thoughts. I sank onto the couch, my mind whirling with the weight of the day. What a day it had been indeed. Day 11. The next day came quick, like a punch in the face, and I woke with a start, still sitting on the couch, dressed in the same clothes from the day before. My hand was wrapped around the handle of the knife, and I knew that sleep had been nothing but a fickle mistress, flitting in and out of the room like a teasing ghost. When I flicked open my laptop, a message from Dr. Jameson beckoned me to meet him at the old chapel of the pastor. Everything was connected, a jumbled puzzle with pieces that fit too well. They knew so much more than me, and it was like I was wandering around in the dark, grasping at shadows. But maybe I had just forgotten. A shadow was lying across my face, and it felt like a mask. Who was I even, just a kid who they'd experimented on? Why couldn't I remember any of it? Why had my past been snatched from me like a thief in the night? After changing into new clothes, I felt marginally better, like a car with a flat tire that had been patched up enough to make it to the garage. My last cigarette tasted dry and stale, but I needed it more than ever. I hailed a taxi and urged the driver to take his time, to let me savor the beauty of the trees that lined the streets. It was like I had given up on myself, had accepted my fate, whatever that may be. When I finally reached the chapel, there was no one there except for Dr. Jameson. He was sitting on one of the pews, his face buried in his hands as if in prayer. He looked up when I approached, his eyes tired and anxious. Doctor, I came as fast as I could, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked relieved to see me. Thank you, he replied. Come sit down. I followed his instructions, settling into silence for a spell, until he finally broke the quietude with his words. I'm damn glad you returned, he began. When we first crossed paths at the rundown hotel, I had no idea what sort of cat I was dealing with. But it's clear to me now that you're still all there, still in possession of your marbles. Hell, you're a miracle. You've had another run-in with old man Portman, I hear. I know what he's after, and while he may have a point with his aims, as a man of faith, I can't in good conscience ask you to take a life, even the life of a man like that. When I first signed up for the program, I was young and green. They dubbed me a prodigy and tossed enough money my way to leave me gobsmacked. but it didn't take long for me to realize that I'd been blinded by the loot. The world had changed, and there was no going back to the way things were before. My life, as I knew it, was over. And while I don't say this in a nihilistic way, I've lost that deep-seated faith, that inner serenity that children possess. That old man is a monster, or so they say. That's the line they'll feed you, and that's the tale Portman will want you to believe. But the truth is far more complex than that. I'm asking you to see both sides of the coin, son. I don't want you to join the old man, nor do I want you to stop Portman. But you're going to have to take a side. All I can do is pray that the good Lord above shines his light on you, he said, peering into my eyes with a mix of sadness and hope. He was a man of science and a man of faith, and in this world that was no easy feat. Science preached absolute truth, while faith was a convenient catch-all with a million excuses. But I couldn't simply believe, not after all I'd seen. There was more out there, that much I knew, but it wasn't some all-powerful deity pulling the strings. I don't want to kill that old man either. It just doesn't sit right with me. But let's be real. He's going to die sooner or later anyway. All Portman has to do is halt the procedure, and that's that, I said, my voice steady and even. It's never simple, is it? He said, his tone heavy with sorrow. There's a reason why that old man has to keep living, at least for now. And it's not Portman's place to make that call. It's up to you. Why? I asked, baffled. You're special, kid, he replied with a serious expression. You're different, unique, and your mind can grasp things that are beyond the understanding of mere mortals. I'd like to tell you more, but you're not quite ready for that yet. That's what learning is all about, facing the unknown. If I told you everything I know, I'd be taking away your agency, forcing my will upon you. And that's not what we're about, is it? Science tells us that we can't predict where someone will end up or what they'll become. It's all up in the air, my friend. As it's meant to be, he said, rising from his seat and walking toward the door. I hope you get what I'm trying to say, he added, opening the door. I don't know if it'll help you make up your mind, but just remember, we're all here because of the darkness inside of us. And with that, he left me there, wondering if I truly understood what he was getting at. I left the chapel feeling restless, driving back into the city in a taxi and winding up at a cafe where my brother and I used to hang out. The coffee was harsh and bitter, like a funeral in a cup, but it brought back memories that might not even be real for all I knew. Maybe the school I attended and the girlfriend I once had were just fabrications. I nibbled on a slice of dry apple pie with a sugared crust that nearly choked me, staring out the window at the passing strangers. They felt real, yet at the same time, they were nothing more than transient phantoms. Lost souls like me, connected by a larger mind that had shattered. All we had was each other, all of us wandering together in this tangled web of existence. When I was ready to settle up, the waiter delivered a wooden crate with a little note on top. I popped open the envelope and the message read, "A choice to make." Inside the crate, I found an antique revolver and a couple of bullets. I shut the lid, concealing the contents, and left the eatery. It was still early and I was looking to gather my thoughts, so I went to a nearby park and observed the youngsters at play from a distance. An old lady took a seat beside me and flashed a kind smile. She had wild white curls and a red vest and looked like she'd lived life to the fullest, like she'd seen everything. "You seem troubled," she said, giving my shoulder a friendly pat. "I'm fine," I replied out of habit. She chuckled good-naturedly. "You're not fine, young man," she said, taking a long drag on her cigarette. "And that's all right. Sometimes we're sad, and that's okay. Sometimes we need to ponder and scrutinize. Life's tough. It always has been and always will be." "I've been thinking about my own mortality," I admitted. "Ah, yes," she nodded sagely. "It's a hard pill to swallow. But you're young and you have a lot of living ahead of you. As for me, I'm looking forward to peeking behind the curtain. You know, Every now and then I've given it some thought. When I turned 60, I felt like I'd crossed a threshold with no way back. I was scared that I'd reached the twilight of my life, but the years kept marching on. I turned 70, and death wasn't on my mind. I hit 80, and never gave it a second thought. Now I'm nearly 90 years old. I try to keep my body and mind active, but as resilient as the human body is, it can become brittle with time. I know that I could be a breath away from the end, but do you know why I'm not scared anymore? I shook my head. Because I've accepted it, she carried on. I've lived my life, and I'm content with how it's gone. There's nothing left to be scared of. Nothing left to be scared of, I echoed. Do you believe in morality? What kind of question is that? She asked, taken aback. I mean, do you think there's such a thing as good and evil? Right or wrong? Some deeper level that we're all connected to? She gave me a long, hard look before responding. You're asking if I believe in God? She said slowly. Yes, but not in a religious sense, I interjected. No, I don't believe in any God, she replied, crushing her cigarette in the sand. I think we're born alone and we die alone. That's it. If that guy over there, the one in the green jacket, were to whip out a gun and shoot us, what would it change? Should we be afraid of it happening? Should we live in fear, hoping that morality keeps us safe? No, I don't think anything like morality keeps this world in line. It's our own free will and understanding that helps us make the choices that will bring about a better tomorrow. Don't give up, young man. Even if your present seems bleak, don't sneer at the world. It won't grin back unless you grin first, she advised, smiling at me. I smiled back and realized that I felt better after speaking with her. My mind was less agitated, even if my heart wasn't at ease. The world was grim, but it was also gorgeous. Thank you. I hope you have a pleasant day and an excellent remainder of your life, I said to her, and took my leave. As I ambled homeward, the shadows of dusk creeping in around me, I paused to purchase a fresh pack of smokes and glanced down at my hands. It was one of those eerie, uncanny moments when your consciousness seems to fracture and spiral into the abyss. I felt like I was observing a stranger, a spectre inhabiting someone else's skin. Rooted to the spot, I pondered for a few heartbeats why I performed the daily ritual of my life. Who coerced me into working for the old man, into abandoning my factory job for the life of a private eye? I felt like a marionette dancing on the end of unseen strings, but perhaps it was a trick of my own mind, and I was the puppeteer. Countless times I'd seen the heroes of tales march headlong into obvious snares, making foolish choices to advance the story, and now I understood their plight. I knew what needed doing, but I just couldn't bring myself to act. I was a fool too. I sparked up one of the cigarettes and lingered at the street corner, gazing at my apartment. When I moved in, I yearned for it to signify something. I wanted autonomy, but I also sought to be true to myself. Somehow we're all shackled to our own essence, unable to escape the tragic fate of being who we are. I grasped Dr. Jameson's belief in a deity pulling the strings because he recognized the machinations of the old man. Never had a fantastical tale felt so tangible, never had I been more convinced myself. But I knew the old man was no god, no fiend, no phantom devoid of light. He was just a man. That, however, wasn't the revelation he sought. Humanity seemed more convoluted than it was worth. But were we ever given a choice? That enigmatic figure in the woods, the android who claimed to be speaking the truth, seemed not so different from me or any other human. He was human, yet a part of him wasn't. Was it simpler that way? Was it preferable to relinquish a piece of oneself to withstand the torment of ceaseless existence? The old man had carved his path and refused to relinquish anything. On the contrary, he craved more. He yearned to reclaim what he'd lost and possess it eternally. It was a ludicrous dream, but a beguiling one. Mr. Portman couldn't look beyond it, and neither could I. We all stumble, and we all bear witness to horrors in a sightless world. What if we could forge something better? That was the aspiration they harbored, but it was a mirage, a cruel illusion that would never become reality. The moment the last drag of my cigarette withered away, I let the smouldering stub plummet, like a stone from a bridge, to the worn floorboards below. The world's detritus, that's what we had become, mirroring the sullied ash that lay at my feet. But the solution wasn't so simple. Extermination would only breed more anguish, more desperate souls clawing for the path of least resistance. What I craved was their enlightenment, their transformation. Without it, the well of choices would run dry. Crossing the threshold into my apartment, I shuddered as the air, heavy with the stench of blood and poison, invaded my nostrils. Composure, I reminded myself, was a necessity I could not forsake. It was the final curtain for this place. I knew that in my bones. I collapsed into the chair and flipped open my laptop, my fingers tapping out a missive to Dr. Jameson. Dear Doc, in the carnival of horrors I've borne witness to this past week, your presence has been a beacon of light. Your words will forever echo in the hollows of my memory. As I typed, my gaze drifted, catching sight of a dusty, well-worn book of poetry nestled among its brethren on the shelf. It conjured the image of a man I'd met at the zoo, his eyes haunted by secrets. Within each of us lies a kernel of truth, waiting to sprout. It's my fervent hope to cultivate a better world, one soul at a time. Amidst the falling leaves on Lake Serene, the memories of seasons past are lost, yet human minds remain forever keen. The autumn breeze blows chill and crisp and clean. The crystal waters ripple with each toss, amidst the falling leaves on Lake Serene. As nature's cycle turns and days demean, and summer's warmth departs with saddened cost, yet human minds remain forever keen. For in the depths of thought we can convene and reason through the moments that we've lost, amidst the falling leaves on Lake Serene. Our intellect may falter, our minds may preen, but reason's logic will not bear a false gloss, yet human minds remain forever keen. So let the leaves fall, let memories glean, for in our minds we'll not count the true cost. Amidst the falling leaves on Lake Serene, yet human minds remain forever keen. Once the mail was sent, I snapped the laptop shut and quenched my thirst with a tall glass of water as I pored over the cryptic verses of a tattered poetry book. I couldn't place where it had come from or when it had entered my life, yet it felt like the distant echo of another existence. With a weary sigh, I closed the book and lay there in the darkness, wrestling with sleep that eluded me like a phantom. It seemed I had scarcely shut my eyes before awakening. Day 12. I took a gasping breath, as though I'd been buried alive the night before. Throbbing pain enveloped my head, and my bones ached as if they'd been ground to dust. I staggered to the sink and splashed icy water on my face. A few gulps of the frigid liquid brought me back to the land of the living. I stumbled to the couch only to find my laptop inexplicably open. I could have sworn I'd closed it. My inbox was empty, but upon opening my browser, a chilling headline from a local newspaper caught my eye. Local prodigy found dead. Without reading the article, the truth settled into my gut like a stone. Perhaps I shouldn't have sent that mail to Dr. Jameson. Maybe I was grasping at straws. The bitter realization sank in as I read of the doctor's demise. I hardly knew him, yet it stung to discover how little I truly understood. "I hope your gamble paid off, Doctor," I muttered, pouring a glass of whiskey. I seldom drank, but the occasion called for it, despite the sun not yet reaching its zenith. Behind me, the wooden box cradling the revolver beckoned from the table. My gaze lingered on it, unwilling to face it head-on. What was I to do? A sudden epiphany struck. I would return to the place I'd last seen the doctor, the old chapel. A flicker of hope ignited within me, the mad notion that his death was a ruse, that he might still be alive, waiting for me. I gathered my belongings and with a shuddering breath took the loaded revolver. I'd never fired a gun and prayed I never would. An hour later I arrived at the chapel, where a lone figure sat within. It wasn't the doctor, but the pastor. You've seen the news, I presume? Dr. Jameson was a good man. He endeavored to do right by others as best as he could, he said, taking a seat beside me. What brings you here? He asked, his tone tinged with politeness. I had to see for myself if it was true, if he'd truly taken his own life or if someone else had. It's hard to comprehend, I confessed, my voice heavy with sincerity. In this vast, enigmatic world teeming with riddles and paradoxes, one must come to terms with the fact that absolute knowledge is a pipe dream, and certainty is an elusive spectre. Fear not, lad, for time shall unveil the truth, he crooned, his voice as soothing as a lullaby. You recall my warning, don't you? And yet here we stand, entangled in the loathsome strands of deceit woven by that grotesque ancient arachnid. He paused, his eyes gleaming. Time's sands run thin, young one. For you, for me, for all of us. The smile that adorned his face no longer bore the mark of malevolence, but rather a gentle, sagacious kindness. Whatever do you mean? I inquired, desperate for a nugget of revelation. Merely a pair of sunsets remain before the old man's power is restored, he said. He may appear frail and feeble now, but rest assured, he won't hesitate once he regains his strength. The stories say he can steal our memories with but a thought, but who can truly say? Perhaps nothing will come to pass, or perhaps, by some miracle, you'll find a way to stop him. He rose from his seat, his bones creaking like an ancient door. Good fortune to you, young one. May you discover the key to our salvation, he whispered before departing. Stepping out of the chapel, I wandered through the town to declutter my thoughts. My footsteps carried me to the most destitute corner of the city, where the air of hopelessness hung heavy. Hollow smiles and laughter echoed, but their very souls seemed to have been drained, as if something precious had been snatched away, leaving them crippled and longing for salvation. Just like the old man and his insatiable thirst for his Morticius, in that moment it struck me that we were all bereft, in dire need of a guiding hand to mend our wounds. As Twilight's fingers crept across the sky, I found solace on a bench, lighting up another smoke. The ember's glow illuminated the faces of passers-by, and I wondered how many of them dwelt on their own mortality. How many had abandoned hope? How many had embraced their fate with a resigned sigh? My heart ached for them, for I knew that for most the possibility of change was little more than a fleeting wisp of smoke. The revolver's cold steel nestled in my trembling hand, and I marveled at how effortlessly it could bring about the end. Was a brief, fleeting existence more desirable than a drawn-out one? Why did we even have to be here in the first place? The reply surged forward with startling clarity. Dreams, hopes, and desires coursed through our veins, driving us to reach beyond our current selves. But was it worth the trouble? If the world crumbled to dust come sunrise, would any of it matter? I shook my head, tossing the dying embers of my cigarette to the wind. There was still time to etch my mark on this earth. I glanced at my wrist. The hands of the watch were nearing 9. I dialed for a cab and found myself at the doorstep of the old man's abode, unsurprised that he was already anticipating my arrival. His manservant ushered me into the familiar chamber where I had first laid eyes on the old man. It wasn't long before he was wheeled in, his chair creaking with age. He appeared unchanged, save for the once fierce fire in his eyes now reduced to a mere ember. "So you finally found your way here," he drawled, the ghost of a smile haunting his lips. "You're late." "I had to think about this," I replied, the weight of the loaded revolver on the table between us making its presence known. "You know, I am grateful for that. I wouldn't want you to make a mistake," he said, his chuckle rasping like dry leaves. "So now you can give me back my memories?" "I can't do that," I declared, resolute. "I cannot help you any longer." I leaned forward, surrendering my head to the cradle of my hands. "I know that it is not easy. Nothing you have seen was meant to be, but you had to witness it. The time has come. Tomorrow you will remember, I am certain. Retrieve the stolen Morticia for me. Bring it to me, and I will reveal all," he said, his smile a crack in a porcelain mask. I don't believe you. You've been weaving lies since the moment we met, I shot back. No, no, young man. This is the truth. I have never lied to you. I cannot divulge everything, for no one can. You must bear witness yourself, else you won't comprehend. I have no need for a blind disciple. I require a leader, he said, barking a laugh that echoed through the room. Bring me the sabre from the other chamber, he instructed his butler. The old man's butler inclined his head and departed the chamber. Moments later he reappeared, cradling a wooden box in his arms. I will leave you alone with it, young man. Remember, you must bring it to me on the morrow, lest there be dire repercussions, he warned, his grin a wicked crescent. This is my final offering. Utilize it, and you shall comprehend, he uttered, before being carted away. I lifted the box and pried it open with trepidation. Nestled within lay a sword swathed in fabric. Unsheathing it, I beheld an ornate antique military sabre. A silver hilt and gold handle etched with cryptic symbols met my gaze. I grasped the weapon, scrutinizing every detail. Dull yet well preserved, the blade bore the faint imprint of a Morticia's code, unlike any I'd encountered before. Securing the sabre in its box, I exited the manor. Another cab whisked me to the abandoned bunker where the machine continued to hum. I reminisced about the day Dr. Jameson and I first set foot here, and sorrow gripped me upon recalling his demise. Nevertheless, I had to forge ahead. The moment of revelation was upon me, but the machine refused to yield its secrets. I tried time and again, yet no visions or memories surfaced from the Morticia. The sabre's purpose eluded me, but perhaps this wasn't the destination the old man intended. Night had fallen, and I chose to seek solace amid the shattered remnants of the laboratory. The ancient weapon seemed like a costly trinket, an artifact from a long-forgotten era that harbored a memory so precious the world hung in the balance. I scoffed at the thought of unearthing any wisdom from it. Why was I the chosen one? The man at the zoo had claimed we were acquainted as children, but his madness precluded any meaningful discourse. His near assault on me within the shadows of the ruins did little to foster conversation. My existence had become a hazy mirage, like a picture captured through the jittering lens of a faulty camera. This was to be my final respite, and I desperately needed it. Day 13. I slumbered longer than anticipated, roused only by the incessant beeping of my watch. The alarm I'd set failed to disturb my deep sleep, and I found myself still clutching the sabre in my right hand. I hailed another taxi and journeyed to the laboratory where the genesis of it all lay. The doctor I'd previously interviewed stood at the entrance, accompanied by Dr. Haley. Their gazes bore into me, as if they'd anticipated my arrival sooner. At last, you grace us with your presence, the doctor proclaimed, introducing himself. I am Dr. David Haley. He grasped my hand in a firm shake before turning to Dr. Haley, who greeted me likewise. I believe you've already encountered my daughter, Dr. Sarah Haley, he remarked, gesturing toward her. She offered a curt nod, her silence speaking volumes. She will ready the Morticia for us, if you'd be so kind, he said, ushering me inside. Dr. Haley strode ahead, delineating the procedure as we ventured deeper into the lab. A sizable steel table crowned with a glass surface came into view. Atop it sat a small black box, adorned with a duo of buttons. She positioned the sabre in the center, marrying the Morticia's metallic code to a fluid component. Her finger depressed the first button, and the sabre blazed a molten red. As it reached its peak temperature, she pressed the second button, and the blade shimmered in an ethereal blue-green hue. Metal liquefied, pooling onto the box below. The cycle persisted until the sabre vanished entirely, supplanted by a diminutive silver card bearing the Morticia's code. It is done, she intoned, entrusting the card to me. How do you feel? Dr. Haley inquired, closing the distance between us to scrutinize my countenance. I don't know. Aren't you the one who's supposed to tell me, Doctor? I retorted. I've never executed this procedure before. You are the first, he confessed, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The first patient you've ever attempted this on, or the first in general? I pressed. Both, he responded. I can only hope that you will recollect everything upon awakening." They escorted me into a chamber encased in glass, reminiscent of the office I'd previously visited, but with a coffin-like bed awaiting me at its heart. "Please recline, and we will connect you to the apparatus. Insert the card into this slot here," Dr. Haley instructed, indicating a diminutive opening on the machine's flank. I settled into the bed, awaiting the culmination of their preparations. The moment my eyelids fell, I found myself standing beside the old man's chair, scrutinizing his visage intently. It was vivid, unlike the vision I'd experienced prior. Unresponsive to my presence, it was only when my fingers grazed his countenance that he stirred. His frame quivered, and he emitted pained moans. I recoiled, surveying my surroundings. No one else was in sight, yet a familiar voice reached my ears. "At last you've arrived. Delightful," uttered a man emerging from the penumbra. He advanced toward the old man, still writhing in agony. "What a pitiable existence! What a futile life!" he whispered into the elder's ear. "Who are you?" I inquired, to which he glanced at me and grinned. "I assumed you'd deduce that on your own," he jested with a boisterous laugh. "I haven't the faintest idea what you're insinuating," I confessed candidly. "No matter, it's of no consequence now," he declared, stepping from the shadows. He bore an uncanny resemblance to me, yet something was amiss. It was as though he was an imperfect facsimile of me, or perhaps I was of him. "Is this your scheme? You seek to claim my body?" I probed, and he swiveled toward the old man. "When I was a young man, perhaps slightly older than you, I grasped a simple truth. Life is fleeting. In the blink of an eye, existence could cease. Initially, I believed it was an inescapable fate, until I discovered a drug capable of reversing the aging process. To a degree. I regained youth, strength, and agility. The world marveled, and I amassed unparalleled wealth. However, a flaw in my solution emerged years later, 200 to be precise. My body began to deteriorate once more, as you witness now. I toiled endlessly, but my weakened state hindered me. I could only reanimate my bones at increasingly frequent intervals, years, then months, and now weeks. Alas, there is a threshold one cannot cross. Human cells cannot replicate indefinitely without succumbing to another form of demise. Each resurrection cost me more, and I cherished those memories, so I bound them. You're familiar with the rest, but you are exceptional, the first we crafted. We exercised caution and patience. Cloning an older version of myself was possible, but a child was more apt to endure the procedure without DNA damage. And you are flawless, albeit distinct," he concluded, smiling at me. "Why am I here?" I inquired. "You're here because you're meant to be," he chuckled. "It's time to awaken, time to recall. You are me, devoid of these memories from the past, absent the pain accrued over centuries. You'll determine my destiny as you possess the capacity to grasp it all. I've always longed to return." "The card you inserted into the machine is our refined Morticia. Created before your birth, it embodies all I've ever known, felt, desired, and dreamt. This is my essence, my consciousness. Yet you can be my vessel, if you so choose. My shattered form is beyond salvation. There's no final intervention to preserve me, only you," he declared, gesturing in my direction. "Choose wisely," he cautioned, drawing nearer. "Do you truly believe I am you?" I queried. "Yes and no. What is man? Recall that question. Do you now comprehend its significance? Are you or are you me? What defines either and what negates both? I'm uncertain, and perhaps no one can know. You've witnessed the memory, the collapse of New York. 2 centuries ago, I rescued the world. On that fateful day, I halted everything. All the immortal beings on earth, congregated in a single city, yearning for me to reveal my perfected formula. They desired the ultimate step toward immortality, but we both understand there can be only one. A single individual to bear humanity's weight, to carry its pain, hope, and love," he intoned, fixing his gaze upon me. "You are that one." "But why did you create me?" I questioned. "I didn't wish to perish," he replied, laughing. "Yet I must, We all must. There's no escaping it. But what is man? I ask you again. You deemed it our memories, and from that instant I knew you were genuinely prepared. I recognized the need to awaken you, but I could no longer delay. Observe me, slumped there, drooling, trembling in agony. This isn't who I am. I am more, far more than you can perceive. Centuries ago, people believed artificial intelligence would be our downfall. They feared the loss of jobs, lives, perhaps even souls. But the truth is, we've already forfeited everything. I witnessed it and transformed the world. I stripped it all away until the time comes to restore it. When the world is ultimately primed for salvation, he murmured, his voice softening. And why us? What makes us the chosen ones? Why should we dictate the fate of all? I demanded. Because we're the last of our kind, he proclaimed. We're the culmination of history. His gaze shifted between the old man and me. You envision a world teeming with potential, as do I. But this era we created wasn't solely my doing. All the things you've seen, the memories you've recalled, these weren't my choices alone. I simply made the best of it. We can still salvage everyone left. I have faith in you. The project is finally complete. With the aid of the Memento Mori program, we'll reign eternal as humanity's newborn king. Every 2 centuries you'll select a successor, crafted in your image, honed to perfection, and molded by life itself. No more pain, no more war, just a united realm of humanity governed by an enlightened sovereign, he asserted, smiling at me. You're insane, I retorted. No, I'm not. I yearn to rescue everyone. We've waited long enough for this moment, he insisted, stepping closer. All of history served as a trial for my creation. You may not perceive it now, but you'll understand soon. And if I refuse, what's your contingency plan? Will you wait another 30 years? Can you even endure that long? I challenged. I no longer concern myself with anything else. It's over for me, he admitted. I've lived far too many years. My body has degraded to uselessness. It's time I depart this world and yield my place to someone younger. If you decline, I'll accept your choice as the decision of the chosen king, but I implore you to understand that though you view me as evil, you can surpass me, become greater, wiser, a true monarch. Don't let my example define your reign. I did what I did to pave your path. I'm aware I've committed unspeakable acts, and I know many will attempt to thwart you, but I ask just one thing. Do not dismiss the world's future because of its past, he entreated, smiling. You needn't choose immediately. Perhaps I'm not the one you should consult, he suggested, and with a snap, the old man vanished from the vision. Maybe you require someone trustworthy. I'm grateful for our encounter, sovereign of us all, he declared before dissipating into the shadows. I awoke within the machine once more, feeling a peculiar sense of relief. It was comforting to emerge without the burden of memories, without grappling with the truth myself. But something had changed. It was as if I had come home. Beside me sat my brother, donning a lab coat from the old man's facility. Dr. Haley and her father stood nearby, awaiting his direction. How are his vitals? Dr. Haley inquired. Unchanged from before, my brother responded. And the memory card? She pressed. It's empty, he revealed. What does that imply? It worked, he replied, smiling at me. What transpired? I questioned. You recall nothing? Dr. Haley asked. I remember enough. I'm disheartened to see you here, brother, but I suspected as much. It's somewhat liberating to finally grasp the falsehoods that always surrounded me, I said, eyeing the man I'd always called my brother, though perhaps he never truly was. I can't alleviate your pain or offer solace, but understand that everything was done for the betterment of the world. You can usher in a golden era, he stated, his face a tapestry of conflicting emotions. You're mistaken, I countered. You did it all for yourself, just like the old man. I'm no god, no king, and certainly not the flawless human you all envisioned, I declared, shaking my head. You're wrong, brother. He stared at me in silence before turning to the others, nodding. They departed, leaving us alone. With a smile he confided, "I can imagine how you feel. You weren't the sole child. All of them perished. All my little brothers, all those innocent children. This process, this program, was no simple feat. Until a fortnight ago, we remained uncertain of its efficacy. Cloning a human is more complex than it seems. We're still grasping the concept of humanity. You aren't the old man, nor is he you. But you were chosen to be our king. Your memories may be fabricated, but your emotions are genuine. Your thoughts, dreams, and aspirations define you. If you accept the old man's position, you'll inherit his wisdom and memories, but not his will. That's a choice you must make alone." "I don't want to be king," I insisted. "You don't have to be, but you could be," he said, inhaling deeply. "You can rescue everyone. I'll take you to your room, where you'll have until tomorrow to decide. In time, you'll recall visions, traces we call them, embedded in your DNA. Not quite memories, but echoes of a past self. If you merge with the old man, you can access this wisdom at will. No need for morticias, no more loss of life." "Why did you do this?" I demanded. "I believed that if anyone was worthy of saving the world, it was you," he replied, smiling. "But to be completely honest, you'll find the answer in your room." In that sterile chamber, the walls bled an unsettling white. A lonesome mattress for one lay centered, and a screen melded seamlessly into the wall, an unnerving vision of technological integration. He handed me a remote, a minimalist's dream with just a single button, and his grin stretched like the Cheshire Cat's. "I'm relieved we made it here," he said, his voice thick with the memory of our meeting at that dimly lit cafe. "I had to be certain you were ready for this. You have to understand, I never intended to deceive you. Now bear witness to the reason behind our actions. Your next move, well, that's up to you." And with that he slipped away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I perched on the edge of the bed, my gaze locked on the screen, a Pandora's box of revelations. Dr. Haley appeared, recounting the twisted origins of the project. I was subjected to a relentless montage of atrocities, horrific experiments, both animalistic and human, trial after failed trial that finally led to my creation. Images of me and the other children flashed before my eyes, and I silently prayed they had no knowledge of the man who had escaped. The screen transitioned to another video, a grim parade of earthly devastation, droughts, famine, poisoned oceans, cities ablaze, and wars of global magnitude. I had no recollection of these horrors, but they had somehow erased them from our collective memory. The video explained how overpopulation, spurred by the miraculous drug the old man had concocted centuries ago, had nearly driven humanity to extinction. That same man annihilated the world's most powerful and affluent in a cataclysmic attack that obliterated New York, the city where I had spent my entire life. Gone was any memory of its former glory, and the rest of the world had forgotten too. Not a single document from the old world survived. The old man had toyed with a memory-wiping device, employing a specific coded frequency to exploit the interconnectedness of the globe and rewrite the memories of an entire population, one excruciating step at a time. As the video rolled, his sinister work continued. The sheer magnitude of death I witnessed left me reeling, unable to comprehend the depths of the old man's ruthlessness. I yearned to stop it, to flee from the reality that unfolded before me, but as he had so coldly stated, the damage was done. I didn't initiate this twisted project, but perhaps I could be the one to bring it to its knees. I pondered his vision, a world so idyllic that each person would eternally feel at home, yet the reality was a far cry from that dream. I struggled to grasp his true intentions, unable to see where this path would end. How many lives would be allowed to continue? Would they even realize their desires were mere puppet strings pulled by a shadowy figure? Their thoughts orchestrated through videos, text, and emotional manipulation, these souls were controlled by wealth, by the unseen hand of a man who decided who would live and who would perish. In the end, none of them had ever truly had a choice. As the haunting images flickered and died, my brother emerged from the shadows. "I see you've reached the end. What are your thoughts?" he inquired, his voice laden with concern. "I'm uncertain," I confessed. "It's as if I've just awoken in this world and everything feels alien to me. How can I know any of it is real?" He sighed, the weight of ages upon him. "Such has always been the human condition. Since the beginning we have struggled to grasp the truth. Yet the cruel irony is that we can never fully comprehend it. We can only dream of nearing its edges. We're bound by truth, yes, but we can't penetrate beyond the abstract understanding, beyond the thoughts of our own intellect. Truth isn't human, and humanity isn't truth. Regardless of your beliefs or perceptions, you must rely on reason and logic. That's all we have left. But we are hampered by language, signs, letters, numbers, words, sounds, call them what you will. We're fragmented, unable to unite. The world's wisdom must be preserved, learned, and passed down through the generations, an eternal cycle. That's what the old man seeks to overcome. He once believed we could attain immortality, that we could conquer the cosmos, but we only succeeded in destroying ourselves, again and again. He halted the cycle of destruction and realized that it wasn't us who should be eternal, but our knowledge. One sovereign, one eternal being, consolidating not only our knowledge but history itself. History shackles us, for it cannot be understood if it's not fully remembered. That's the old man's belief, and it's mine as well, he declared, settling beside me. "But how can we know who's right?" I asked. "We can't. Right and wrong exist in the ethereal realm, bound by divine laws beyond our reach and comprehension. We know of their existence, and we can strive to emulate them, but we cannot embody them as they truly are. That's why you were created, why you were chosen. You'll possess the knowledge of all that came before. The old man obliterated our past to forge a new existence, free from the errors we couldn't recall and were doomed to repeat. You'll be our salvation, our king," he said with conviction. "And if I don't want to be king?" I challenged. "You must decide whether to save everyone or not," he countered. "Your indecision is a choice in itself. We can only move forward. The past is lost." He rose and headed for the door. "I feel inadequate for this task. It seems impossible for one man alone. Why us? Why the old man and his clones? How can you expect people to accept this?" I demanded. "They won't, at least not initially. But this world was prepared for your arrival. The old man has been planning for this day for nearly 2 centuries. I'm not one to question his design. He didn't force you because he needed you to be your own person. He needed you to become who you are now. You've shaped yourself, and nobody else. It isn't about where you come from. It's about the journey that brought you here." I cast my gaze back to the screen, entranced as the video chronicled the old man's birth, his formative years, his life with his wife, and the offspring he eventually artificially created. It was surreal, witnessing my own visage on that screen. Deep down I knew they were right. I couldn't squander this chance to effect positive change. Yet the thought of what lay ahead sent shivers down my spine. Mr. Portman and his faction wouldn't sit idly by, nor would countless others across the globe. The old man claimed there would be no more death, no more war, but I couldn't bring myself to believe it. Conversely, my demise or refusal wouldn't alter the course either. Mr. Portman would seize my position by force and forge another variety of hell on earth. The technology birthed by their hands wouldn't fade away, and I couldn't make people forget. As my brother had said, the truth is absolute. Even if we managed to erase it all, we'd find ourselves right back here, in another iteration of this moment. It was an inescapable destiny, and I steeled myself to make my choice. Day 14. When I awoke the next day, Dr. Haley greeted me, offering a crisp apple and a small bottle of water. "Good to see you awake," she remarked. "You'll need to come with me. A shuttle will take you to the mansion. He's eager to hear your decision." I trailed her through corridors and descended several flights of stairs until we reached a cavernous chamber, brimming with computers and screens. Dozens of men and women toiled behind them, some hunched over, others conversing in hushed tones. All this technology, all this knowledge housed within a single, formidable machine. I was destined to become a biological equivalent, indistinguishable from the artificial intelligence humanity once dreaded. Perhaps I would be an even graver threat. Dr. Haley led me to the entrance hall, where a small assembly of individuals awaited. Clad in black suits, white shirts, and dark ties, they exuded an air of authority. One clutched a clipboard and regarded me with inquisitive eyes. "Good morning," he addressed me, an air of formality in his tone. "Dr. Haley, we'll take him to the mansion now. You'll have the necessary devices prepared for our return, I trust?" he inquired. "Yes, sir. Everything will be ready for you," she assured him. The man then guided me to a sleek black limousine. We traveled the streets for a considerable stretch when a sudden recollection struck me. Spotting a small football field in the distance, I fixed my gaze on one of the goalposts. "Could you stop the car? I just remembered something important," I implored the driver. He nodded, bringing the vehicle to a halt. "What is it?" he queried. Silently, I stepped out of the car and ambled across the verdant turf. Had I been here before? Had I ever played football? It felt like I had, like I'd participated in countless matches. Vague memories washed over me, with ephemeral images of structures dancing in my mind's eye. It was as though centuries of play unfolded before me like pages in a child's scrapbook, while I gradually approached the goalpost. A smile graced my lips as I sat down for a moment. The suited man lingered several meters away, likely anticipating this very occurrence. I was certain this was the final stage of the test. I dug my hands into the earth, unearthing a small blanket. Wrapped within, I discovered a petite snow globe depicting the Brooklyn Bridge. Back then, I should have sensed something amiss. I had never heard of this bridge or the city it spanned. Its significance eluded me then, but clarity enveloped me now. Touching the code of the Morticia, visions materialized before my eyes, unaided by technology. Ethereal figures dashed across the football field, their laughter echoing through the air. Trees, cars, dogs, and cats surged through the passage of time, their surreal display evoking a fantastical dream. It all felt real, but the spectacle was mine alone. The old man intended for me to witness this, and I grasped why he couldn't articulate it. It was simply too overwhelming. I rose from the ground, beaming at the man, who remained expressionless and unmoving. I returned to the car, and we made our way to the old man's mansion. Upon entering the room where we'd first convened, I found him seated, patiently awaiting my arrival. A sly grin spread across his face as he drawled, "I reckon you've had yourself a taste of success," the moment I stepped into the dimly lit chamber. "Indeed," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "You've borne witness to the myriad possibilities, gazed upon the potential futures that lie within your grasp. The past, present, and future. You've seen them all and known them to be true. This, my friend, is what I've misplaced, what we've all misplaced. And now it's my gift to you and this world. I've bestowed upon you knowledge, but knowledge is a hollow gift to a fool. I've granted you imagination, but it's a vacant promise to the hopeless. I've endowed you with ambition, yet ambition is a feeble offering to the indolent. What I present to you now will forge your destiny and that of the entire earth. If you yearn to alter the course of history, to save us all from ourselves, you must don the mantle of our king." "I comprehend," I murmured, taking a seat beside the old man. "When I first entered this room, I was in awe. I suspected you were enigmatic, perhaps perilous, and undoubtedly merciless. All that you've claimed rings true. I am not, nor will I ever be, your mirror image. I accept your memories, for I'd rather they not fall into the hands of another. What transpires next remains a mystery, but I pray I'm prepared," I said as I gently placed the snow globe on the table. "Long ago, when I was but a boy, I lost a dear friend. We'd been climbing trees behind my grandpa's ramshackle farm, a test of our mettle, a race to see who could scale the heights faster and higher. We were heedless then of how fragile life truly is. Upon reaching the summit and hollering to my comrade that I'd emerged victorious, I couldn't spot him. I scrambled down a few branches, and there he was, lying motionless on the cold, unforgiving earth. Desperation gripped me as I hastily descended, but it was too late. He was gone. I dashed into the farmhouse, breathless, to tell my grandpa. He enveloped me in his strong arms and bade me wait. After the ambulance had taken away the lifeless body, my grandpa found me at the place where my friend had breathed his last. He told me that time waits for no one, no matter who you are or what you desire. He knew that one day he'd be claimed by death, as would my father and eventually myself. It wasn't something to fear, he said, but it was a sorrowful truth. That day he gave me something. "Do you have it with you?" the old man inquired, and in that instant I understood. "I bear recollections of my grandpa, your grandpa, I gather, but not of that day, not of that friend," I uttered, carefully extracting the small pocket watch from my jacket. The old man examined it for a moment before nodding solemnly. "It's yours now," he declared. "Take it with you, but first open it. Behold its face." I pried open the watch and swiveled it, allowing my eyes to trace the inscription etched within. "Tempore progrediente, meminisse non potes mortem te semper inveniturum esse, memento te moriturum esse." It translates to, "As time goes by, you cannot remember that you will always find death. Remember that you will die." A melancholy smile stretched across the old man's face, and I noticed a tear glistening in his eye. I had the words engraved after his passing. The answer to the question I posed to you eludes me. I shall never truly know it, but therein lies the answer we seek. Never forget, yet always press forward. I've committed unspeakable, monstrous acts upon the inhabitants of this world. My hubris initially propelled me, and later my shame drove me into the depths of insanity. My memories will become yours, and when the time is right, you'll know how to forge an heir. The choice of when to let go, and the vision that will guide us to greatness rest in your hands. In this, I hold firm belief. A man strode into the room announcing, "Sir, we are ready," to which the old man silently nodded his assent. "I'll do what I've always aspired to do, and I'll never forget," I vowed, as the man wheeled the old man towards the waiting car. I lingered in the room, alone with my thoughts and the ancient pocket watch. All I ever yearned for was to uncover a place where I could make a difference. I sought the truth, just as the old man had said, and above all else, I wanted to be myself. With a smile, I snapped the watch closed and rose to my feet. I stood where the old man had once imbued my life with purpose, only to assume his role and carry on his legacy.